those who say BOJ actually intervened. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, John Tucker, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcasts. Looking at this shares of Paramount Global, PARA is the ticker. They're up 4.8%, down 15% year to date, down 45% over the last year. And for those that aren't paying attention or follow this stuff closely, Paramount is the old Viacom, which owns a bunch of cable networks like MTV and all that kind of stuff, as well as the Paramount studio, and where they produce all the TV shows and movies and stuff like that, plus CBS, the CBS television network and all the stations. That's what the new Paramount is. Boy, it's in the news, and not for the right reason. The expectation is there's going to be a change of control of some or all of this company. They might even be forcing out the CEO as of today if you didn't have enough news around this stock. So let's check in with somebody who follows this stuff very closely for us. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior U.S. Analyst Geetha Ranganathan. So Geetha, can you update us on kind of where we are today? Will there be a sale of some or all of this company in the near future?
Yeah, good morning, Paul. So there is, so this week is actually it's a key week for Paramount in many ways. They obviously have their earnings later today, but as you just pointed out, this deal with Skydance, which has been this ongoing saga now for almost 6 months, well, they are in this exclusive negotiating period. It's a 30-day exclusive negotiating period with Skydance, owned by David Ellison, and that exclusive period comes up on May 3rd, which is Friday. So they do want to get something done before then is my guess. And so there's been a lot of news on them kind of trying to sweeten the offer. Sherry Redstone is now open to what is called a majority of the minority vote, which means she is open to letting the non-voting shareholders actually have a say in whether the deal should go through or not. And in the meantime, on the Ellison side, they are actually looking to buy back.
That there's a mission, there's a larger mission there. And I'd love if you talk a little bit about that.
Sure. I'll stand, actually. You see me? Yeah, I guess. Okay. Yeah, so as Jonah was alluding to, there are a lot of negative things in the world. There's a lot of terrible things that are happening all over the world, all the time. There are lots of problems that need to get solved. There's lots of things that are miserable and kind of get you down. But life cannot just be about solving one miserable problem after another. That can't be the only thing. There need to be things that inspire you, that make you glad to wake up in the morning and be part of humanity. That's why we did this. This guy called Tsiolkovsky, one of the early Russian rocket scientists, the great saying, Earth is the cradle of humanity, but you cannot stay in the cradle forever. It is time to go forth, become a star-faring civilization, be out there among the stars, expand the scope and scale of human consciousness. I find that incredibly exciting. That makes me glad to be alive. I hope you feel the same way.
Kids.
Please just hang out and wait.
That is a brutally tough sell. So is the expectation is this will likely go to court because this is not going to be fair treatment of all shareholders?
Yes, that is, all public shareholders. Of course, Mario Gabelli has been very, very vocal about this, but there have been numerous letters by shareholders to, the Redstone family, to the board, urging for them to not take this deal, especially because there is actually another offer that is in the works. Now, that offer is from Apollo, and it was basically for $26 billion. It was valuing the equity of Paramount at $12 billion. That's a considerable premium to where the market, where it is trading today. So right now, if you look at the market cap of Paramount, it's about $8 billion. So that's a substantial premium. So basically, shareholders were, kind of were wondering why Paramount was not taking this all cash deal. Of course, what they're saying is the company would go away. That's one thing. And then there's the other thing where they say that they haven't actually received a formal proposal. The financing for Apollo is not really clear. And then in the midst of all this, we had an added wrinkle with some news reports suggesting that Sony is kind of going to team in with Apollo for a bid. But of course, no formal bid, no formal offer just yet. My guess is they're waiting till Friday for that exclusivity period to end, and then they kind of swoop in.
See, told you, a hot mess. My vacation brain takeaway seems
Yeah,
relatively
perfect.
accurate. Okay, why would the booting of Bob Bakish actually make any difference here?
So Bob Bakish has been one of the most vocal protesters against the Skydance deal, and he's been butting heads with Sherry Redstone for a while right now. Even before this deal, all these deal talks started, they were having a lot of disagreements on the future of the whole streaming business, on what they should do with Showtime. So there has been a lot of, or there's been a growing tension, I would say, between the two of them. And then, of course, he's been very, very vocal in resisting the Skydance deal. So obviously, she thinks, getting rid of him and putting an interim leadership committee would at least change that status quo and maybe hasten the process towards the Skydance deal.
All right, if the Skydance deal were to go through, I'm still unclear as to what Skydance really brings to the table that enhances the value of Paramount. What's the pitch from the company?
Yeah, so their whole pitch is, they obviously run a studio operation. They've done a lot of deals with Paramount in the past. So there's obviously a lot of history there. But the main thing really is, Sherry Redstone likes dealing with the Ellisons. Of course, they do have some deep pockets. Larry Ellison, who's David Ellison's father, is the 10th richest person in the world. So, there could be some kind of backstop there. But other than that, it's really, they have everything to gain. They've talked a little bit about synergies. They've talked a little bit about financing. But again, Skydance is obviously gaining a lot more here than Paramount.
I love how you broke it down, Paul, in the beginning of sort of what Paramount is included in. And I'm still really confused as to why this has been broken up before this. And I've read other articles about money, Sherry Redstone didn't want to do it, etc. But Geeta, what is the most valuable part of this?
The most valuable part of this is actually the studio. And that's really the only thing that people want, because, it's a content creation asset, and content, as you know, is king. Of course, that's what, Sumner Redstone has been saying all along. And anybody could use the content that comes. And they have some really good content. They have great IP, a lot of iconic franchises. They create a lot of good streaming content, which has performed really well for their service, Paramount Plus. So everybody's actually looking to get their hands on the studio. The other assets, the streaming asset, Paramount Plus, it has about close to almost 70 million subscribers. But remember, Alex, this asset has actually lost tons and tons of money for them. So ever since it started, ever since it was launched, it's lost almost $5 billion. It's going to lose another couple of billion, over the next few months. So, the streaming asset, obviously, from a profitability standpoint, just doesn't have all that much value. And then you look at the TV assets, of course, it does bring in about $4.5 to $5 billion in EBITDA. So in many ways, it is a cash cow, but it's declining. So, we have EBITDA that's already fallen about 25-30%, and it's going to continue to decline with cord cutting and the ad pressures.
Geeta, got about 20 seconds left. May is coming up. That usually means upfronts. Do the networks even do upfronts anymore?
They are doing upfronts,
Nice.
Paul, but again, it's very, very fragmented. You have all the digital players, you have the new fronts, but yes, they are happening.
CBS used to throw a nice bash at Tavern on the Green. That was worth it.
Okay.
What's an upfront?
I'll talk to you off air. It's very hush-hush. All right, Geeta Ranganathan, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Geeta Ranganathan, she's a media analyst at Bloomberg Intelligence. The upfronts are basically when the TV networks or broadcast networks sell about 80% of their advertising time for the upcoming season starting in the fall. They sell it now, so they know how much money they're going to have in the coffers, so how much money they can spend on programming. But in a world when nobody's really watching TV or spending money on TV, do you even need to have an upfront anymore? Is it a party where nobody really cares? Paramount in the news. Keep an eye on it today. We may have some big news coming out of there. Maybe the CEO getting pushed out. So we'll keep an eye on it. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down the path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
Test always, as they should have. I think it brings in a lot of outside antagonists.
Today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Saudi Arabia. It comes as Israel is planning a ground invasion of Rafah. Blinken says the U.S. and European allies have been urging Israel not to take this step.
I'm hopeful that they will make the right decision and we can have a fundamental change in the dynamic.
Israel says it will accept the release of 33 hostages at the start of a truce. That's down from 40 demanded earlier. Ukraine's troops were compelled to make a tactical retreat from 3 villages in the eastern region in their battles with Russia. Speaking in Kyiv, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said Russia has been able to exploit its battlefield advantages against Kyiv's depleted forces.
NATO allies have not delivered what they promised. The United States spent months not agreeing a package for Ukraine.
Stolten says the lack of ammunition has enabled the Russians to push forward along the front line. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you very much. Here's a headline for Paul. He's going to love it. Comes from the Journal. Less is more, the case for slow productivity at work.
There's a case for slower productivity.
Yeah.
And
okay.
How does this work?
Here it is. So this is an author, Cal Newport, and this was an article about him and the book. So his book is called Slow Productivity, The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. And there's some points here. Basically say, you're looking for high achievers, say yes to fewer things, do those things better, and then slack off in strategic doses. And the top-notch quality is the goal rather than the enemy. If you think about it, when you were managing and stuff, how many meetings were you in all the time? And were those meetings actually productive? Or would you have been more productive doing less of those things and more other stuff?
Absolutely. I mean, you're always concerned about that, and we always tried to minimize all that kind of stuff. But that kind of went by the wayside a little bit during the pandemic when everybody was at home, and it seemed like all you were doing was on Zoom meetings. Now, that's not me because I was in radio, but I mean, I heard that from a lot of people, and then it kind of brought that risk back into the workplace here. But what's amazing is, I think with technology, you could never disengage. In fact, I would test my analyst. I said, this is a 24/7 job. If something happens over the weekend on one of your stocks, I want you to be out talking about it. And if I ping you about one of the news on one of your stocks and you don't get immediately back to me on a Saturday, Sunday, I think I'm like, aren't you on?
Right.
You know, which one could argue that's not the right way to go.
Right.
That's just the way I was kind of trained in this business, if you want to. But anyway, I'm sure it's different for different industries and different companies. So
it is, and I have this argument with my mother all the time too, because she lived in a world where she would bring homework, but she wouldn't actually have a phone, right? Because this was in the 80s and 90s. And she's like, well, I worked a lot of times at home too. And I'm like, but it's different when you have a device that you're responsible for all the time and you don't have a good reason for why you're not on that, for example, versus you're choosing to bring home a huge bunch of paper that then you're going to edit for your job. It's a different kind of control group.
It's different, but I've been amazed at how productive the overall economy, the global economy, and certainly the U.S. economy has been during the lockdown. Everything was just extraordinary how productive, how people found a way to be productive.
Well, apparently, don't get bogged down in the administrative overload, Paul.
Less is more.
There you go. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about much more, including Apple and what's going on there with the EU. Anurag Rana joins us next. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Anurag Rana. He is a senior technology analyst. We're going to preview Apple. Busy week for Apple. They've got earnings after the close Thursday. They've got their event coming up May 7th where they introduce new products and things like that. A lot going on with our good friends at Apple. We'll get a preview there. Plus, we can just talk all things tech with Anurag. RJ Gallo is going to join us. He's a senior portfolio manager. Covers the fixed income space at Federated Hermes. He'll give us his thoughts on these markets here. Again, what will the Fed do and when will it do it? But first, let's kick it all off with Charlie Pelton of Bloomberg Business Watch.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Stocks higher across the board. Back to work Monday with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. 14-point gain right now in the S&P at 51.14. That is a gain now of about 0.3%. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 76 for the Dow, a gain right now of 0.2%. The NASDAQ Composite Index up 52, a gain there of 0.3%. And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BNY Mellon Insight, June 4th to the 6th in Nashville, Tennessee. Do not miss the essential event for the financial advice community. Visit insight.bnymellon.com. 10-year, 4.61% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.97%. We've got gold lower now by $3.50 the ounce. Right now, gold, $23.36 the ounce. Little change there. West Texas Intermediate crude oil trading lower by 1.6%. WTI, $82.51 a barrel on WTI. Another busy week for earnings news and another busy week for economic data. Friday, the jobs report. Wednesday, a Fed decision and news conference. Stephanie Roth is chief economist at Wolfe Research.
Our base case is you'll start to see the inflation data start to soften in the next couple of months, and then there might be some restoration of the confidence, but he's not going to be able to communicate that on Wednesday. It's going to be probably a fairly hawkish press conference.
And, of course, we'll have Jay Powell's news conference Wednesday for you live at 2:30 p.m. Wall Street time. Elon Musk's quick visit to China paid immediate dividends. Tesla getting in principle approval from the government to deploy its driver assistance system in the world's biggest auto market. Tesla shares, they are surging today. Right now, Tesla up by about 12.3%. Recapping, S&P up 14, up 4/10. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg
You're right
Business
there,
Flash.
Charlie.
I'm doing fine. I tell you, it's back to work after a beautiful vacation in Mexico, and yeah, exactly. Cabo San Lucas is absolutely wonderful.
Cabo San Lucas is a player.
Yeah, he is a player. But I mean, this is not his type of vacay, so that
It
was
really
part
isn't.
of it. It really.
You are so right. Sitting there doing nothing, I'm not used to that kind of vacation at all, but it was kind of nice.
He was probably bopping around, like finding weird things to photograph. Check out his Instagram. All right, Charlie Pell, thank you very much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news and analysts from all our top analysis around the world. We cover about 2,000 companies and 130 industries for Bloomberg Intelligence. Bailey Lipschultz is also joining us. He covers all things equities for us over at Bloomberg News. Bailey, you are also looking at Tesla. My point earlier was that it just shows how much it doesn't take for Tesla to rally, because we don't actually know any of the details in terms of revenue drivers, sales, anything along those lines.
No, exactly. There's a lot of excitement around the tie-up with Baidu. So this came, as Charlie mentioned, surprise visit. Yep. Elon flies across to China, and all of a sudden there's a deal. But Alex, to your point, we see this sharp move higher, stocks up 12.5%, still down 24% year to date. So it's still kind of recouping and trying to claw back the terrible start to the year for the company, slowing sales, slowing shipments. It does seem like a potential revenue driver, just looking at what the analysts are calling out, given the fact that it costs about $100 a month to have the assistance driver, but not really a big move for the company, though. Again, China is its second biggest market, I believe. So potential revenue, potentially getting ahead of the likes of BMW for some of those more tech-savvy drivers, but best performer in the S&P 500, second biggest driver, at least on an intraday basis, behind Apple.
I mean, I guess that's the Elon effect.
Yeah.
I mean, even with China,
Isn't this why you own the stock?
It's a large,
right?
yeah, big. That's exactly right. That's key man risk, that's for sure. But it looks like he got that deal, or at least kind of moved it forward in a big way, and that's kind of all the market really needed to see. All right, so Domino's. See, Alex and I, we grew up in places where there actually is real pizza. You, unfortunately, grew up in California where they have no pizza. Although I'm a huge fan of California Pizza Kitchen. I raised my kids there at the Delmonico Shopping Center in Monterey, California. Domino's put out some numbers.
Yeah, really strong results, up 4.3%, trading at the highest level since January 2022. The interesting things to me that stood out, not only did they beat on comp sales here in the U.S. and showed strong wallet share across all income levels, they talked up their Uber Eats launch and the ability to advertise on that, and they also talked up their loyalty program. So, Paul, maybe it's below your taste, but if you like it and you're getting points back and free pizza, why would you not go?
Where in California did you grow up?
Rancho Cucamonga.
Rancho Cucamonga.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Well, here's actually, I'm glad you're from California, because this is my question. Because wasn't there a piece on Chipotle and like McDonald's, because of the minimum wage increase in California, their prices have soared, and people are like, why am I paying $5+ for a Big Mac? And I'm wondering how it's impacting Domino's in California.
Well, so these results haven't shown that, but I haven't done my own personal channel checks just yet, but I will next time I go back to California. But when I talk to my parents and people in California, the big thing is higher wages, so they're laying people off. All of the delivery drivers now are using Uber Eats. I worked at a pizza place throughout high school and college. They're trimming back their headcount because they don't want to pay people more money, especially at some of these bigger chains. So it's changing how they think about employment, and that's one of the big things. It's really just using California as a case study because it affects big fast food restaurants.
Yeah.
And so it's impacting how they think about it, and we've seen it here in New York. There are kiosks to order. You don't necessarily need someone taking your order.
All right, so you were pizza, deficient growing up, but you had In-N-Out Burger.
Did have In-N-Out.
Is that now? Is there crazy lines for your
Always.
In-N-Out? Why?
Always.
So they don't add more locations.
They do. They build out, and every time they add a new location, it doesn't matter.
Like the one in Monterey, where we go to in Monterey, like at off hours, it's crazy. I'm like, so build another one a mile away. I'm like, what are you thinking?
Well, I will say my one critique of In-N-Out is I've noticed burger shrinkage. So the patty is smaller, and that's been over the last few years. I've noticed the patty getting smaller. Prices aren't insane if you go to Five Guys, but I will say, Paul, it's wild. No matter what time of day you land, In-N-Out's
everywhere I go to, each one.
Wait, is In-N-Out like a smash burger? Is it that kind of thing?
Yeah.
It's so
better.
good.
Yeah.
But
people have lots of opinions about this kind of burger.
I'm a Five Guys guy myself.
See, no, but Five Guys is a higher quality burger, I will say. If you're going for like a beefy patty with some toppings, Five Guys is
So it's In-N-Out comparison to like McDonald's?
Better than McDonald's. It's comparable to Shake Shack. I think it's better than Shake Shack. I'm not a Shake Shack fan. I don't know. East Coasters.
We learn things. Okay, before we let you go, SoFi, we have the CEO coming up on TV in about half an hour. But
down 10%. At first blush, first quarter results, full year expectations were solid. Second quarter revenue and EBITDA well below what analysts were looking for. Show me now, and that's kind of the main concern. We have seen some comments from their CEO, Anthony Noto, talking about higher for longer, creating stresses in different parts of the company. They do a lot of things, and when the company on the earnings call said 2024 will be a transitional year, not the news investors want to hear.
10% today. Wow, no kidding. Boy, a lot of volume too. 93 million shares.
Yikes.
People voting. Okay.
All right, Bailey, thanks a lot. We really appreciate it. Thanks for all the burger info.
Yeah,
I also appreciate that.
I tell you, you could go down that rabbit hole with pretty much anybody for a long time.
I'm not a burger person.
I know.
So, I'm just, but makeup, skincare, whatever. Each to his own. Okay, let's go to Apple for a second. So that stock is actually up by about 3%. It got an upgrade over at Bernstein. Bernstein apparently sees China issues as cyclical, but the broader headline was that the European Union took aim at Apple's iPad. It's been hit by its digital dominance crackdown. I don't really know what that means, but luckily Anurag Rana does. He's Bloomberg Intelligence technology analyst. He joins us now. Anurag, what does that mean, that the EU's digital dominance crackdown hits the iPad?
Yeah, to be very honest, it's not much, frankly. Only because the EU wants to make sure that these ecosystems or the operating systems are open and allow third-party apps and, the opening of the payment system, etc. Apple's already said they're going to do this for the iOS, for the iPhone, which is a bigger deal. And now they have to do this for the iPad operating system too, which they're going to do anyway. I mean, it's not going to be a big deal, again, mathematically, because as you know, iPad revenues are tiny compared to what they generate from the iPhone. So the services associated with iOS, iPhone is far bigger than the services associated with iPads. So in our view, not a big deal, but we follow whatever the news says.
All right, Anurag, a big 7 or 8 days coming up here for Apple. Thursday, they report their earnings, and next Tuesday they have their developer conference on the 7th. Let's start with the earnings. What can they say, or what does the market want to hear about China, about what type of headwind it will be and for how long?
So if you hear the word China stabilizing, good. If you say China still bad, not good. Okay. That's it. I mean, there's not a whole lot other than that. Those are the only two things you'd be looking for, because the AI stuff's not going to happen for another month or so when they do the developer conference back next year in June. The May event is about the iPads, the new iPads coming out, which is again exciting, but again not a needle mover financially.
Yeah, I was going to say iPad. Okay, fine. What did you make of this Bernstein upgrade? So they upgraded the Apple target to outperform from market perform. They have an unchanged price target of $195. But the reason behind it I found interesting. They said the China weakness, they see it as more cyclical than structural. And they say that overall, Apple's business in China has just been more volatile than the wider company, and everything's kind of already priced into that point. Do you agree with that based on your research?
See, one of the things I would agree is, yes, it is cyclical. But one of the things I don't know is how far is the bottom for these, we're going to see a double-digit decline in China. This is going to happen. Now, I do not know whether next year we're going to see the same thing or not, because what is going to drive that iPhone cycle in China if things are still weak, if consumers still weak, and Xiaomi is still giving them a hard time. So I think it's tough to time when this thing is. But I do believe that Apple's a premier brand, and people are not getting rid of it to the sake of something else. The Xiaomi phone just came out after a very long break, and which is what doing. I apologize, Huawei phone, not Xiaomi.
So we had Dan Ives on earlier today on surveillance, and no surprise, bullish about AI and Apple's ability to capitalize on AI, despite the fact that they really do not have any dedicated offering, it appears to most investors. How do you think about Apple and AI? Will they, at some point, become an AI play for investors?
So I think the most important thing is when they announce in June, is it going to be a tie-up between them and Google again, or are they going to license some technology from OpenAI, or are they going to build something in-house? I think the in-house is probably the weakest at this point because, if they would have had something, they would have already talked about it. And the second thing is they're just pushing a lot of resources in the last 6 months, and it's not easy to come up with those things. But I think I'll feel far more comfortable if they announce a deal with Google and say, we're going to license some of Google's technology to build our own products or improve our products with that technology because they already have a deal with them on the search side of things. So that would make me more comfortable than them trying to push out some of their own stuff.
Would you categorize as Apple being behind AI, or is this just what Apple does? Like they let everyone else kind of front run a little bit, they see where the good and the bad are, and then they kind of make their own decisions?
And I would say almost everybody was caught off guard with OpenAI, and I would say Apple was behind.
So again, but if you're Apple, you're not behind in very many things for a very long period of time.
Right.
I mean, do you envision AI becoming a big part of the Apple story? Because one could argue without it, it's a lot less attractive.
No, I completely agree with you. In this particular case, what could happen is, let's say you build a lot of the Gen AI features or search features within the actual iOS, or you would ask Siri that question that currently you go into an app and you input that information and then get it. But what if you were able to do it just on the operating system? And I think that is a powerful way of solving that problem. But again, you need to have the technology to do that.
What else is on your docket this week? What else is front and center for Anurag?
I think Amazon announcing tomorrow night is a very big deal. I think that's going to tell us whether Amazon's going to surprise us on the cloud side or not, because we've seen Google's done well, Microsoft's done well. And if Amazon does not perform, it's going to raise all sorts of questions if they're losing market share, if Google's ahead, if Microsoft's already showcasing its AI products. So I think it really focuses on Amazon, in my view, more than honestly in Apple at this case.
All right, so I think one of the questions here, Anurag, is just technology in general. I mean, and it's all about AI. And the question I have is how much of this incremental, or how much of this AI spending, which has gotten people so excited about any company who has any exposure to AI, how much of that do you think is incremental? If I'm spending on AI, for example, am I taking money just from my IT budget?
This is the single most important question for this year. And for what we have seen, it's more of a transfer of budgets at this point. Because when you see results from Accenture or IBM, you see consulting being really weak. So people are taking money from that bucket and putting it in hardware or AI-related hardware. Now, we think it's going to drive incremental spending. It is, driving it, but at the expense of consulting. But we think it's going to come back, and it may come back next year.
That's interesting. So it's like one big pot that's just kind of moving around, and then how you wind up playing it. Is there any indication that Amazon's cloud won't be good in the same way that Google's was and Microsoft was?
Well, there are certain, you could see the tea leaves is the way we want to think about it is Microsoft did well because it had its OpenAI relationship. Amazon does not have that. Amazon's selling a lot of the nuts and bolts at this point, and it's really large. In terms of size, it's the biggest cloud of all. So maybe it takes them another 2 or 3 quarters to get that big push on AI, and they are still stuck in the old non-AI technology. But I think that's really, they have to come out and prove that they are a viable player, in the current status. In the long run, I'm very certain that Amazon will get the benefits of a lot of incremental spending on AI.
All right, good stuff. Anurag Rana, thanks so much for joining us. Anurag Rana, he's a technology analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us from Chicago. So we have Apple Thursday after the close, Amazon, I guess, Tuesday after the close. So a couple other big prints coming out of technology. I would say some of the technology numbers have been good kind of so far this quarter. So it'll be up to these two big guys to continue, because it just feels like when you look at this market, if technology is not working for you, where does the market go?
Industrials and energy. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, like if you look at year to date, it's communication services, then it's industrials, then energy, then tech, and the communication services is a Google and Amazon story at the end of the day. So you have to wonder, can the cyclicals really take control? Which leads me to energy and the idea that how many energy stocks do you actually want to own?
Right.
Or is it just going to be the big guys and the rest of them are going to be scrambling? Anyway,
A little bit of weakness in oil for once. I haven't seen the weakness here. Down about 1.5%, $82.60 a barrel for WTI.
No weakness in the bond market, though. You got 10-year yields down by about 4.5 basis points, which is basically some buying coming in. We're going to get the refunding announcement today, and then where Treasury is going to issue on Wednesday. We're going to break that down with RJ Gallo, Senior Portfolio Manager, Fixed Income at Federated Hermes. Coming up next, this is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got gains for the U.S. stock market. This update is brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with the solutions they need to grow a thriving business. Commonwealth, go where you grow. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. Stocks higher as a solid earnings season keeps the market afloat, despite bets that the Fed will be forced to leave rates higher for longer. The S&P now up 13 to 51 5112. That is a gain of 0.2%. The Dow up 90, higher now by 0.2%. Nasdaq up 37, also an advance of 0.2%. 10-year 4.61%. The 2-year 4.97%. Spot gold a little change now at 23.36 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 1.3%. WTI at 82.75 a barrel. Even after a recent share slump, Lululemon Athletica's $46 billion market value ranks alongside consumer giants such as Kraft Heinz and Constellation Brands, and that is not sitting well with analysts at Jefferies. Analyst Randall Koenig is asking, does this make sense? Pointing out that Lululemon is now on a par with the market cap of Keurig Dr. Pepper and Kimberly-Clark. He sees further declines for the stock, which has dropped more than 20% in the past month. Today, shares of Lululemon down now by 0.4%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. The S&P up 12. That is a gain of 0.2%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pell, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio, streaming live on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. We want to talk the fixed income market coming up, and I was just looking at the news. Boeing announced today they look to sell bonds after reporting a cash burn. They wanted to do about $8 billion of a deal here. And I just see another Bloomberg story coming across just recently. Boeing sees $77 billion in demand for its six-part bond sale. So even after that really tough quarter, it just shows you how strong the corporate bond market is and how much they're looking for bonds to invest in. So that's a perfect time to bring in RJ Gallo, Senior Portfolio Manager, Fixed Income at Federated Hermes, joining us from Pittsburgh via Zoom. I'm sure a phone call went in from the underwriters into Federated Hermes for some Boeing bonds, but boy, RJ, it just shows the demand out there and the strength of the corporate bond market, doesn't it?
Yeah, corporates have done very well this year. High yield in particular on a total return basis. Issuance of IGs also been very strong. I think the fact that the economy has proven to be much more resilient than many would have expected in the face of a Fed funds rate between 5.25 and 5.50 has underpinned strong demand for corporate credit risk. Fundamentals are good. Earnings have been generally favorable. Obviously, there's some concerns now as the Fed has pushed back on the prospect of rate cuts. What's next? But the theme year to date has been resilience in the face of a tight Fed, and that has certainly underpinned strong demand for corporate credit.
So would you take credit risk or duration risk then? Or I don't know, like both?
It's funny that you say that. For our investment process, we sort of break things up into sort of different components of a fixed income portfolio. We deliberate on duration, yield curve, and what we'll call credit or sector, the allocation of a multi-sector portfolio across different portions of the bond market to include, say, treasuries, investment grade corporates, high yield, emerging markets, et cetera. And our playbook year to date has been one of somewhat low conviction on the rates side with respect to duration. We're neutral at this point in time. We think that means that there's symmetric risk that yields could rise or fall from here. That's proven to be a fairly safe place to be. We're not adding alpha by being neutral, but we had been more constructive, expecting yields to fall at the beginning of the year, and the simple resilience I was just mentioning has made that not the case. With respect to credit risk, we've been a little up in quality into places like mortgages. We like the valuation in mortgages better than we do in investment-grade corporates and high yield. We're somewhat underweight investment-grade corporates and a little bit more underweight high yield. We own them, but we're below the universal index in terms of our allocations to corporate credit risk, in part because of the strong rally has driven valuations to a place where we feel like there's not a lot of upside left from here. That's not calling for panic or recession, but we think there's opportunities for spreads to widen on event risk or volatility, and we revisit those underweights in that time frame.
All right, so, what should I do here? Should I go buy a 2-year treasury darn near 5%, or should I take that phone call from my Citigroup salesman who's trying to sell me some of this Boeing paper here? Do I take the credit risk just by and large?
It's a great question. I think that it's important you think about asset allocation to step back a little bit. There's a lot of question right now about where are equilibrium yields. What where's the Fed going to tell us in the next summary of economic projections? Where do they see the long-run Fed funds rate? Where is R star? And R star, conceptually should give some underpinning to bond investors in terms of expectations of where yields will be pulled to over an economic cycle. When you don't have a lot of confidence about R star, it makes it a little bit harder tactically to say, yeah, the bond market looks real cheap right now. Let's add duration. Let's add interest rate risk to our portfolio. And in that context, that's why being at neutral is sort of dissatisfying as a bond investor. It's almost like you don't have a view on the market. But one thing we do have are some of the highest yields in 15 years. And I am one who believes that R star is probably not 2.5. It's not 5 either. I wouldn't be surprised that the Fed is increasingly going to be migrating their long-run dot upwards. That suggests that yields won't probably go as low prospectively as they have in the past, say, 10 years, certainly outside of the context of crises like a pandemic. What does that mean to a bond investor? Well, it's just to me that the Fed funds rate north of 5, money market yields north of 5, that's a good place to be for your very risk-averse investor. But for someone with a little bit of a longer-term horizon, the bond market's valuation, the level of yields has been restored to a point where you can add duration to your portfolio and take some more balanced investing as opposed to, do I own cash or do I own stocks? Bonds are sort of back in the sense that they have a role in a diversified portfolio because they have been reset higher in yield, even if I don't know those yields will go down in the next 3 months.
It's such a good point, which leads me to the refunding announcement. So we're going to get the amount today, and then where Treasury will issue on Wednesday, and then just hours later, we'll get questions on, will the Fed back off on quantitative tightening? What do you think the combined effect of all of this is going to be?
Well, I think the Yellen Treasury has been pretty careful. The amount that's being financed is near record proportions, I think only surpassed by the depth of the pandemic and the borrowing that was going on at the time. As a result, they've relied a lot on the short end of the curve, with short yields being high and money market balances being astronomically high. I think they're at a record. There's plenty of demand at the short end of the curve. I don't expect any sharp turns away from that strategy in the upcoming announcement. I do think the Fed's QT program, we're getting closer and closer to the point, and the Fed has telegraphed this, where they're going to want to slow down the pace of balance sheet reduction, slow down the pace of QT, I think as it's come to be called, which is a rational thing to do. As much as there's uncertainty about R star, there's also uncertainty about the right level of reserves in the system. And the Fed doesn't want that uncertainty to sort of spill over into financing market pressures, which is what happened the last time they were trying to reduce their balance sheet. So I think both parties, the Treasury and the Fed, have been very careful about these key variables, how much the Treasury is borrowing and where on the curve, and how the Fed is going to alter their balance sheet. I don't think either one of these is apt to be very market moving right now because of the sort of deliberation and the signaling that has gone on, both from the Treasury and the Fed on both of those fronts.
All right, RJ, I'm going to jump in front of Alex here. I know she wants to ask about this. How about municipal bonds? How about
I missed the muni
bonds?
segment,
Exactly.
man.
Exactly. How do you think about munis in this environment here?
Well, munis have the absolute yield argument has motivated many investors to buy bonds in general, certainly on the corporate bond side and also on the muni bond side. Investors have been putting money to work into SMAs. The mutual fund flows on the muni side are positive. They're not huge, but they're meaningfully positive. I think the point I was making a few moments ago about relatively high yields and restoring fixed income as a component of your balanced diversified investment strategy, it resonates with people, and you can see that in the behavior in the muni market. Interestingly, however, that has meant that munis have held up better on a year-to-date basis. So, for example, if you look at the Bloomberg Muni Bond Index on a year-to-date basis, I'm getting an updated number here, it's down 1.7% in total return. At the start of the year, we expected that would be positive by now. So that's been a little bit of a setback. But that's still a lot higher than the Treasury Index, which is down 3.2%, or the aggregate index, which is down also 3.2%, just about the same. Why is that? Well, munis have outperformed given that strong demand. And the muni market is underpinned right now by the fact that the value of the tax exemption goes up at today's higher yields relative to the last decade when yields were much lower. So tax-exempt income has helped to attract investors into the muni space who might not be so worried about whether yields are going up another 30 or 50 basis points or down 30 or 50. They like the valuation in a longer-term sense in the here and now. And the credit story is good. Muni's credit story has been very fundamentally strong given the economic expansion and sort of the long tail of some of the fiscal transfers that went from federal to state and sort of bleed through the muni credit system. That's still very much a positive dynamic there as well.
All right, RJ, great overview. As always, really appreciate getting some of your time. RJ Gallo, Senior Portfolio Manager over there at Federated Hermes. See, municipal bonds can be cool.
Muni's cool. Muni moment cool.
Exactly. Joe Misek, very cool. With our news in New York City.
Thank you very much, Paul and Alex. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is urging Hamas to make a decision quickly on Israel's conditions for a temporary ceasefire. He called Israel's proposals extraordinarily generous during a discussion at a special World Economic Forum event in Riyadh. Bloomberg's Laura Davison is in Washington with more.
This is really viewed by all sides as sort of the last moment to get a ceasefire and hostage deal before Israel could go into Rafah, which is where more than 1 million Palestinians have been taking shelter for the past 7 months or so. So this is really viewed as sort of a tense but very important moment.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in Washington. Columbia University President Manoj Shafiq says that there is no agreement that has been reached with student organizers protesting against Israel to remove their encampment on the school's lawn. Now Columbia has given students until 2 p.m. to leave. Small towns in Oklahoma are beginning a long cleanup after tornadoes flattened homes and buildings, killing at least 5 people. The damage was extensive in the community of Sulphur, where a weekend tornado crumpled many downtown buildings. WNBA star Brittany Griner, who was released from Russian detention in a high-profile prison swap in 2022, is opening up in an ABC interview on her first moments after her arrest inside of a Russia airport.
I'm thinking about my wife, thinking about what my family's going to think, public opinion's going to think. You know, I can just see the headlines now. Like, I could just visualize everything I worked so hard for just crumbling.
Griner says she left vape cartridges containing cannabis oil in her luggage, but says it was an honest mistake. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long. Here at Bloomberg, we have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all advancing right now. 6-point gain in the S&P 500 index, 51.06 right now. That is an advance of 0.1%. The Dow also up by 0.1%, higher now by 50 points. NASDAQ up 19. That too a gain of 0.1%. 10-year 4.62% with a 2-year now at 4.97%. Spot gold, little change, down less than 0.1% right now. 23.37 the ounce on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.3%. 82.79 right now for a barrel of WTI. Apple and Amazon are among tech names scheduled to report in the next few days. As for the overall market backdrop and the chances for a further decline, specifically among big tech stocks, Lori Calvasina is head of U.S. equity strategy at RBC Capital Markets.
We've been getting a little bit of a pullback, and a lot of that has happened as we've had some volatility in these bigger names. Look, I'm not looking for any kind of massive pullback in those names or massive pullback in the markets. We've said we thought the pullback would be worth about 5 to 10%. We've had more than 5. I don't think we're quite done yet.
RBC's Lori Calvasina. Apple shares up 2.8%. Amazon up by less than 0.1%. Again, recapping, stocks are higher. S&P up now by 7, a gain of 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you very much. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the news for you through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts who cover 2,000 companies, 130 industries around the world. Also, once a week on Mondays at this time, we're also going to bring you the perspective from our great analyst over at Bloomberg NEF. It started off as Bloomberg New Energy Finance. They're basically a huge data provider on everything that concerns energy, from wind to solar, to oil, to gas, to coal, to EVs, to carbon credits. I mean, anything you need to know within energy space, they provide amazing data for.
Oh, you like these guys then?
I like
see
these
what's
guys.
happening here.
This is my jam. The news from last week that I did find interesting, that I did key in on, is that a bunch of panel makers and polysilicon producers are trying to get tariffs increased for equipment coming from Southeast Asia. Basically, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of equipment coming on, solar cells and modules are coming on, and that is lowering the price of those, which are then hurting U.S. companies. The problem is you kind of need all that stuff if you want to greenify or decarbonize your economy quickly. So let's get to some of the analysis here. Joining us now is Paul Lacanzo. He is Bloomberg NEF Senior Associate. Can we impose tariffs on the stuff we need to decarbonize?
Well,
quickly, decarbonize quickly.
We should not. The U.S. has been doing it for a while, actually very quietly, since 2012. So it's not a new thing. And it's really made solar more expensive in the U.S. than everywhere else in the world. So the difference is the U.S. has had very generous subsidies for solar for a long time, and that offsets some of those higher input costs. But is it the most efficient way if you're trying to decarbonize quickly and grow a sector quickly? Probably not.
So what are we talking about here? The panels, more than the panels, what are we talking about here?
Yeah, we're talking mostly cells and panels.
So the panel gets the sun, converts it, or puts it into where does it go from there?
Correct. It goes into an inverter, which is the brains of the system, and the inverter translates that direct current power that the panels produce into alternating current power, which is the one that we use.
Thank you for explaining. Because I represent like 99% of our listeners.
This is true. Sorry about that. Yes. So what part of that would be taxed with a tariff?
The panels. But what typically those tariffs target are the cells, which is the cells is essentially what composes those panels. You stack them together and you assemble them. Because the cells is really the true technological component of the panel. The panel is just like cells assembled, basically. So what the U.S. is trying, or what some of these companies are trying to do, is impose a new set of tariffs on. Like, there's already tariffs on panels coming from Southeast Asia, and there will be new tariffs coming in June. But this would be an additional set of tariffs that they're trying to impose.
Why can't these companies like I don't know, First Solar or something, make these panels themselves?
They do. First Solar sits in a different league. First Solar has a different technologies. We're talking about crystalline silicon technology. First Solar uses a different type of technology called thin film. And First Solar has been producing their own panels for a long time, and they have really ambitious plans in the U.S.
But I guess that's the point, right? Because they don't want the cheaper ones coming in and then diluting what they're able to sell. So why can't, I guess the better question I should have is, why can't they make it for as cheap as the ones that Southeast Asia is selling for?
Yeah, the question is probably, the answer is not going to surprise you. Just higher input costs, higher production costs, higher labor costs. You cannot really reach the same scale that you can in the Asian countries in the U.S. It's not just about the factory that you have, where you assemble or making the cells or making the panels. It's about all of the adjacent supply chain. And China and some of these Asian countries, and by extent from being so closely to China, they are able to ramp up all of the adjacent supply that they need in a very efficient way. So typically, those mega bases in China have massive solar factories. And if you go across the road, that's where your aluminum frame supplier is going to be. If you go in a little bit further down the road, that's where your glass supplier is going to be. So it works in coordination quite nicely, and that helps improve efficiencies and lower costs.
It doesn't seem high tech to me. Why would I care if China's producing them, other than if at any time they could stop producing them and screw us? But I mean,
because you're saying that there's no like cybersecurity or security measure for that.
Don't I just want the cheapest panel?
That's correct. And that's exactly what we've been trying to say for a long time. Solar manufacturing is a terrible business to be in. It's really fierce. Competition is really fierce. Where typically go through all these swings of overcapacity, a bunch of bankruptcies, and then new companies arise from nowhere, and there's again overcapacity. So the IP and really the technological know-how there is really not that difficult, and I really don't understand. We don't understand why you would want to throw so much money at building this industry in the U.S. unless it's a geopolitical hedge, which is something that obviously begs a very different question and a very different set of analysis.
What kind of, let's say that these tariffs do go through, so this request could raise the prospect of tariffs as high as 271.5% later this year. Let's just pretend that happens.
Yeah.
And I want to install a solar panel on my house in Massachusetts. What's that going to cost me now?
It's going to cost you a ton more money.
A ton. I don't like a ton.
No. I mean, the 271% is very unrealistic. So what's happened typically in these petitions is a little bit of the boring stuff. But what happens what happens is they file this petition, and then if the U.S. Agrees to investigate these companies, or they open their books. The companies open their books, and they have to prove that the amount of subsidies that they receive is not as high as what that countrywide tariff would look like. So typically they get a tariff rate that is much lower than the 271% that you're referring to. And can range from like 30 to 50%. It just really depends. But the bottom line is, if that were to happen, obviously imports from Southeast Asia would be completely ruled out in the US. And that would really trigger the renaissance of the U.S. manufacturing industry, but you would have to pay more for your panels.
Just real quick, 30 seconds. What percentage of our panels here in the U.S. come from China today?
From China, 0.
Okay.
So the U.S. has been singling out China for a long time.
Okay.
Southeast Asia, more than 80%.
And these more than 80%.
Yeah.
And these tariffs are just for China or for all of them?
For Southeast Asia, for Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, and Cambodia, which represent that 80% number that I just quoted.
Paul, thanks a lot. This is really interesting stuff. And it's just when you want to put a solar panel on your house, there's a lot more that goes into it. And if you want to sort of decarbonize quickly, why wouldn't you want the cheapest available, Paul, to your point? All right, thanks a lot. Really appreciate that. Paul Lescano joining us from Bloomberg NEF. So it looks like we have a report from the New York Times about Skydance, potentially. Did you see? Skydance cash infusion to pay down debt and buy back stock. They're looking at $3 billion cash infusion to sweeten the deal. This is according to the Times.
All right,
enough to sweeten?
I don't know. It's going to be tough. If you're a non-controlling shareholder like a regular person, you're not going to get fair value. That's the concern out there. So we'll see how it plays out. So we'll see. Paramount up 4.5%. This is Bloomberg.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. It is now 11:53 on Wall Street. Shares of Tesla surging by 16.5%. Elon Musk's quick visit to China paid immediate dividends, with Tesla receiving in-principle approval from government officials to deploy its driver assistance system in the world's biggest auto market. Sarah Hunt is chief market strategist at Alpine Saxon Woods.
I think that what Musk is doing is quite smart, and he's going in there and saying, look, I can bring you this functionality that you don't have, and I can use Chinese technology to do it. And I think that is one of those, he's the consummate salesman. He's been able to explain to people, I can do this, I can do that. Even with what's going on with the numbers, which weren't that great, I'm going to bring a lower price car, it's going to be fine. And I think a lot of people were short Tesla. I think a lot of people were worried about Tesla. And I think what he's done is he's just thrown a whole bunch of more information at you and said, this is all going to be great, and let's hope that the numbers can prove it out.
Sarah Hunt of Alpine Woods. Today, Tesla up 16.3%. The developments came after Musk made that unannounced trip to China over the weekend. Apple's iPad has been added to a list of big tech products hit by strict new rules in the European Union. The company now has 6 months to make sure its tablet ecosystem complies with a raft of measures under the EU's Digital Markets Act. Meanwhile, Apple's stock has been upgraded to outperform at Bernstein. Analysts say weakness for the latest iPhone in China is more cyclical than structural. Apple shares, they're up today by 3%. SoFi Technology shares are plunging today. SoFi now lower by 10%. It did lift its full-year earnings guidance as it anticipates higher for longer interest rates and leans more heavily on its financial services and technology platform rather than its traditional lending lines of business. And those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Happy Monday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio, and we are live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. It is Monday. We made it. We woke up the first day. That's always the hardest, I think. We cover all the top news for you, including world and national news, and for that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, Charlie. Growing unrest continues on college campuses across the country over the weekend, with police arresting hundreds as the number of protests rise from USC to Yale to Harvard and to Columbia. This computer science major says her hope is that schools will do more to show that they are taking concerns of the student demonstrators seriously.
We want to feel supported by our institution, and we want to feel like they're meeting us.
At Columbia, the university was unable to reach an agreement with student organizers protesting against Israel to remove their encampment on the school's lawn. Now Columbia has given the students until 2 p.m. to leave. U.S. and other international allies continue to push for Israel and Hamas to reach a deal for a ceasefire in Gaza. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is urging Hamas to accept an extraordinarily generous offer.
In this moment, the only thing standing between the people of Gaza and a ceasefire is Hamas. They have to decide, and they have to decide quickly.
A senior figure in Hamas says there is progress in the new proposed deal, but some issues still need to be negotiated. 5 people are dead after tornadoes ripped through Oklahoma. State House Speaker Charles McCall said the destruction was extensive in Sulphur, a town of about 5,000 people.
The loss of life is the most precious thing, and that is what weighs so heavy on my heart. Everything else can be rebuilt, but we can't restore life.
More severe weather is possible with the most concentrated threat for wind damage, large hail, and a few tornadoes in East Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. The CDC believes it's the first documented cases of people contracting HIV through a cosmetic procedure using needles. 3 women in New Mexico were getting vampire facials, which involves blood to rejuvenate the skin. But a federal investigation found the clinic reused disposable equipment. The spa closed after the investigation began, and its owner was prosecuted for practicing medicine without a license. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, Alex, Charlie?
I was just talking to my mom about that yesterday.
This blood thing?
Well, I think the clinic might have been overstating it. I would put that in quotes. Like, they didn't have good licenses. They were not doing any good practices. But yeah, no, vampire facials in real places are real things.
Whoa. So vampire facial, explain it to me again.
You take your own blood,
Okay.
and then you take your platelets out of your own blood, and they inject it back into your face. And it's supposed to help your collagen and wrinkles. It's going to be all glowy. And they call it vampire because when you're done, you have like all these little red dots surrounding your face. Now, in theory, you shouldn't get HIV from that because it's your own blood.
Okay.
But if you use some other blood and nothing's labeled, you don't test it, well, then yeah, then that could be dicey.
Now, do you know of anyone who has done this?
No, I do not. I have not done it.
Okay.
But I know
But I didn't know if
about
it was
it.
all part of the investing in your face thing.
You can make an argument that is investing in your face, and it is actually your own blood investing in your face. So you can make an argument you're not injecting filler or collagen or Botox. The boys have just cleared out, by the way. Michael Barr and Charlie Pellet have now left. They're like, I can't contribute to this conversation. We're leaving now.
Is that like a thing in New York City?
It's definitely a thing in New York, yeah, for sure. Oh, for sure, yeah. Well, because now you don't want to be the person that has the huge lips and the big fillers with the big cheekbones and the face doesn't move. You want to be the glowy, no wrinkle person, and that's a vampire facial.
And what age did women typically get that, do you think?
This is a great question. I don't know. I think all ages. I think it depends. I mean, I'm going to try not to get it.
Yeah.
But I'm not opposed to getting it, as long as it's in a real place that has like real requirements and stuff.
There's some places like on Park Avenue. Where
Totally, yeah. I'm not going to Albuquerque for it.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Anyway,
All right, let's just stick with that. All right.
I was going to talk about McKinsey and some stuff, but this was much more interesting.
much more
so sorry,
interesting.
McKinsey, about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we made it through the first day.
Yeah, not
Tomorrow,
bad.
Amazon.
So you're not no more
earnings.
holiday, right? No more, you're back with us because Charlie, we never know. He comes and goes. He's like the wind.
I'm back with you.
All right, very good.
Until like, I don't know, end of August.
All right, Balance of Power with Joe Matthew from Washington, D.C. That starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
They're back, but will they do anything? Welcome to the fastest show in politics as the House and Senate get back to business today in Washington with a threat, of course, to fire the Speaker of the House at any moment. Don't keep your hopes up. We'll look at the week ahead with Jonathan Tamari at Bloomberg Government to see if progress could be made on any of the issues before lawmakers, with insights today from Maya McGinnis at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Donald Trump meets with Ron DeSantis, and RFK Jr. hits the campaign ATM in Boston. We'll have analysis from our signature panel today. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are along for the ride, and guess who's back? We start, as always, with a look at Wall Street and none other than Charlie Pellet live in New York. Charlie, how we doing?
We're doing pretty good for the bulls today. Joe Matthew with the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the green. Back to work Monday, an 11-point jump right now in the S&P 500 index. That is an advance of 0.2%. We've got the Dow also up now by 0.2%, higher by 65 points. And NASDAQ at the start of a very busy week, up 39, up now by 0.2%. Indeed, lots for investors to consider. We've got the jobs report Friday, Amazon earnings tomorrow, and a Fed decision and news conference as well on Wednesday. Jay Pulaski is Chief Investment Officer at TBW Investment Management.
The Fed is in the rearview mirror. We're focused on other things. Whether they cut in September or November or December is not important. We are willing to trade rate cuts for earnings growth, and that's the trade that we're making. And earnings growth is accelerating, and stocks are going to be perfectly fine as long as that continues.
Jay Pulaski of TBW Investment Management. Paramount Global shares are higher after the New York Times reported that Skydance is offering Paramount a $3 billion cash infusion. Right now, we have got shares of Paramount up by 3.8%. 10-year, 4.62%, with a 2-year now at 4.97%. Spot gold trading higher by $1 the ounce to $23.38, up by less than 0.1%. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1%. WTI WTI 83.01 a barrel. So again, recapping. Stocks are higher. S&P up 13, up 0.3%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington once again. Here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, great to see you back. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube. It's great to see you and have everyone back together as we try to follow the bead here on what might happen, if anything, next in Congress. And there's a fair chance that the store is basically closed after the funding bills for Ukraine and Israel passed just about a week ago here. It's Marjorie Monday in Washington. Everybody wondering about the motion to vacate, whether it's even still alive, because Marjorie Taylor Greene's language has changed a lot. Remember, she threatened to fire Mike Johnson. It only takes one in the House to get this motion to vacate on the floor if he brought Ukraine funding to the floor. Well, now it's law. The money's already going out. The weapons are on the way. And, well, there's still no privileged resolution yet to make this happen. And her language has changed quite a bit. Remember, a week ago, she was vowing to bring this to the floor if the speaker did not resign. He called her bluff, and we're still waiting. There's the matter of an FAA extension that needs to be handled, a reauthorization of the FAA, and it could become a big old Christmas tree. This could be the last train leaving the station, assuming they get that done. And Jonathan Tamari joins us now from Bloomberg Government to pick up the pieces from there. It's great to see you, Jonathan. We're going to start dealing with the FAA, I presume, imminently. Is the speaker going to get fired this week?
That's the big question, and we're waiting to hear what lawmakers say when they come back to vote this evening. We, as you mentioned, Marjorie Taylor Greene had talked about that she was going to bring this motion, that the vote on foreign aid was crossing a line for her. But really, things have been pretty quiet in the days since, in the weeks since. As you know, people leave town, kind of tempers can settle very often. The heat of the moment can dissipate. And so we've not seen anybody else publicly join in her call to get rid of Speaker Mike Johnson. There's a lot of Republicans, even those who don't like him, who don't want to go back through the whole tumult that they already went through of trying to replace a speaker. And so there's no sign yet of growing momentum, but I think we'll be checking with lawmakers as they show back up tonight to see if anybody has anything new to say when they return.
Yeah. She filed the motion to vacate 38 days ago, which is pretty interesting to see nothing yet. So let's talk about actual business, if we can, for a moment. Jonathan, we've got 2 weeks here to reauthorize the FAA, and it looks like we've got some deal-making underway. There is reporting on the way this reauthorization may look, and it may not come with what some people expected in the form of a stablecoin bill or Safe Banking Act. What are you hearing?
Yeah, I mean, there was a release last night from the relevant chairs in both houses, the Senate and the House, and both parties. So all four got together and they released an FAA reauthorization bill that they say is a compromise that they've all agreed on. So that signals that it could be on, not upon here, a glide path towards getting done in the coming weeks. The Senate has a procedural vote already teed up for Wednesday. And so we'll see how different lawmakers react to the compromises here. But when you've got the chairs and the top ranking members in both parties, in both houses on board with something, it signals that it's probably going to get done. And this carries a lot less of the kind of political weight and political divides as some of the things that we've been dealing with in Congress recently, like foreign aid or the FISA spying bill or debt ceiling or budget. This is something that's pretty much a straight policy issue. And I would imagine that it does get done. And as you point out, it could be the last really big thing that Congress gets done. So we'll see if people try to pile on other elements into this bill to kind of get one last bite at the apple.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's just in our last minute, Jonathan, what's the conversation about amendments going to look like? Because this could be carrying a whole lot by the time it's passed, if it does pass.
Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of rank and file members wanting to get amendments on this, things that they've been working on throughout this Congress, knowing that by the time they leave for their summer break, there's not going to be a whole lot of legislating done for the rest of the year. And there's the uncertainty of who's going to win the White House. and that might delay any further action. So I think you're going to see people wanting to put their pet projects onto this bill. And of course, the issue for leaders is always that the more you do that, the more you risk adding something that is objectionable to one faction or the other, and that could actually stop the bill in its tracks. So it's a careful balancing act, as always, that I think we'll see play out over these next few weeks.
Yeah, this ought to be fun to watch. Jonathan Samari, great to see you. Say hi to everybody as they're rolling back in. Bloomberg Government Congress reporter with us live on Balance of Power. As we add the voice now of Maya McGinnis. I can only imagine what Maya has been thinking in these final throes here of getting something passed after the Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan passed the House and Senate. She's, of course, the president for a committee for a responsible federal budget. Maya, it's great to see you. Surely a balanced budget amendment will be added to this FAA bill, right?
Yeah, and any new things that they tack on, they'll definitely pay for it because they've been demonstrating such commitment to fiscal responsibility.
Well, we're being cute here, of course, but what do you think about this? Just before we move on to what's next, we just passed a $95 billion foreign aid bill. It was originally an emergency request. I know a slice of that Ukraine money is a loan. Should it be offset?
You know, emergency spending, one doesn't generally feel like you have to offset it because it's truly for emergencies. That said, the fiscal environment in which we are right now means that anything that adds to the debt, no matter what the purpose, it could be very important, it could be a real emergency, but debt is debt, and that still puts upward pressure on inflation, on an interest rates. It compromises our national security integrity. So there are a lot of reasons that no matter how important something is, it would still be preferable to offset the costs. There was some interest in the House. Jody Arrington, the chairman of the Budget Committee, had talked about some very smart healthcare reforms that we could have used to offset the costs, but there was that didn't get any real momentum. I think if you take a step back, the point is, in order to do emergency spending or foreign aid when it's necessary, you have to be fiscally secure. We need to get our fiscal situation in better shape. So even if it's not a direct offset, we should turn our attention to bringing the national debt down. You've heard me say it before, and I'm sure I'll keep having to say it.
Well, gosh, they have all summer to work on it. Just imagine what we could get done if we actually were serious about that, Maya. Are you worried about this FAA bill being loaded up with expensive Christmas ornaments?
I am worried about it. I actually don't think that will ultimately be what happens. I think there'll be many people who make runs at attaching their bills, the things they prefer. But listen, everybody in the House has an election that they want to get back home and start focusing on. It's a very difficult tightrope to walk to get certain things attached or not. So I think there's a risk of a Christmas tree, but I think the most likely outcome is that it passes without anything major being attached to it.
Wow, that's saying something. Is that just because everyone's exhausted?
I think it's because
of the division in Congress?
Right, the patchwork of getting things that would be attached that enough people could agree to would be very complicated. Even if someone supported some of the amendments, they might be resentful they didn't get their own amendments. And because there's not a commitment to which things should be attached, like there's division on the tax bill, which is the kind of thing that you could think of as being attached. There's division on a lot of the different policies. So I don't see it falling into place in an elegant enough way that leadership is able to craft a bigger package. Could happen. Definitely people will give a try.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the tax bill, because this must be a head scratcher to you. They were practically celebrating its passage a couple of months ago. This was said to be, look, we can get along and get things done. It moved pretty quickly. The chairs of the two related tax committees in the House and Senate came to terms, and then it got bogged down in the Senate with a lot of different concerns about this. Some people wanted to make changes that essentially brought the bill to a halt. Is there any chance now that, even though we're past April 15th, this tax deal, a multi-billion-dollar tax deal that had bipartisan support, could actually see the light of day?
There is a chance. I mean, this has been a really interesting and complicated process. From our perspective, nonpartisan, worrying about fiscal issues, it's even been complex to make sense of it, because it is a deal that puts together a lot of different taxes, the child tax credit, the business taxes. And what I don't think is smart about it is that they're temporary. And when you do temporary tax policy, you know you're setting yourself up for a cliff. You're not looking at the full costs. On the other hand, they did put forth offsets for this, and that sets a very important precedent, which is if something is worth doing, it's worth finding a way to offset the cost rather than borrowing for. And I thought they worked very hard to come up with that. I thought there was a lot of bipartisan agreement that they should offset the cost, and they came up with an approach to do that. So it was a policy that I thought made sense. Listen, I think the thing we should be focusing on more than anything right now is overall getting our fiscal house under control before you're adding tax cuts or spending increases. But at least things that are offset are important. But there is a lot of resistance. I think where everything's headed is, oh my gosh, we can't get anything else done in 2024. Let's push it to 2025 when all of these tax cuts are going to be expiring. There's going to be so much work to do. Let's just throw it into the big soup.
Well, the lobbying money is coming in on extending the 2017 tax cuts. The lobbying and the organization. We actually talked to Kevin Brady, of course, a former Ways and Means chair, about his new efforts coming back into the fold here in Washington. This is going to be a big part of the conversation, Maya. What's your thought on this? What would happen if those tax cuts were made permanent?
Well, yeah, 2025, let me just say, it is going to be a huge year because those tax cuts are expiring and we're going to have a debt ceiling situation to deal with again. So there's going to be a lot of moving pieces and very important pieces. The cost of extending the tax cut is phenomenally large. You're talking about well over $3 trillion at a time where, as you know, the debt's near record levels, interest payments are soaring. We can ill afford to have trillions more added to the debt. Offsetting the cost is certainly something that can be done. We should be focusing on real tax reform, not tax cuts. And there's a lot of base broadeners in the tax code that you can go through and, limit, expand some of the offsets that were used before. A lot of things that would bring the costs down. But that's exactly what those lobbying groups are lobbying against. Everybody wants to preserve their favorite hole in the tax code that benefits their constituencies. So this will be as difficult as tax reform originally was in terms of making sure that it doesn't add to the debt. And you have a very strange bedfellow situation here where most Republicans would like to extend those tax cuts, though a significant amount would like to pay for part of them. And the president, of course, has said he won't let taxes be cut for anybody below $400,000. So that's a lot of tax cuts that people are supporting without talking about how they don't pay the costs. And again, everybody in their budget says we're going to pay for it, but nobody says how.
Yeah, the proposal will be paid for, right? But then maybe reality will kick in here. This is really interesting as we spend time with Maya McGinnis, considering that effort in 25 and whether anything can actually happen now. The billionaire's tax is supported by, according to our polling, Maya, I say the billionaire's tax, the concept of a billionaire's tax, as President Biden is proposing, is supported by Democratic and Republican voters by vast margins. This includes Donald Trump supporters, the same people who would probably celebrate extending the 2017 tax cuts. And I'm not sure I understand the rationale there, but could a billionaire's tax help offset some of the rest of this if it happened?
Yes, I think that those are the proposals that you're going to hear much more about, and you're exactly right, from both sides. It's no longer a Republican or a Democratic issue because populism and kind of the populist approach to taxes is something that has gained traction in both sides, and there is a real resentment about the huge levels of income inequality as billionaires continue to get more and more billions. I think the popularity of these tax increases on the very wealthy are going to grow. And I think one of the questions will be as they start trying to figure out how do you actually structure these so that they're constitutional, so that they're workable, so you don't have people who are leaving the country, hiding their assets. There's all sorts of ways to avoid them. But I think that you will see bipartisan support for all sorts of different approaches to middle-class tax cuts and higher taxes on the wealthy. It's no longer the domain of just Democrats, as you pointed out.
That's really interesting, an interesting time that we're in. I don't always quite understand the way they come out in the wash here, Maya. I've got less than a minute left. When we talk about the tax deal on the table, you and I talked about this for a couple of moments. Does the committee support this current framework now, the exchange for a wider child tax credit in exchange for lower corporate taxes in some cases? Does it work for you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, our take is generally policy neutral. There are many policies that could make sense, but we're not going to say this is the right or wrong policy. We're going to say, does it add to the debt? It's okay to borrow when there's things like COVID or emergencies. It's certainly not okay to borrow now. So something that either reduces the debt, which is our first choice, or doesn't add to it, then we would say that's fiscally responsible. And then we can fight out the details of the tax policy. But do we need to continue to reform our tax code? We do. We need it to be pro-growth and we need it to be fair. So those are all important considerations, along with let's not add more to the debt.
Crystallizing the philosophy at the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. We don't always get to talk about that part of things. She's the president, Maya McGinnis. Great to see you, Maya. Hope you had a fun weekend. Josh Wingrove is jumping in next. From the White House, I'm Joe Matthew on Bloomberg.
It's 12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We do have stocks higher across the board. 14-point gain right now in the S&P 500 index at 5114, up by about 0.3%. Dow Industrials up 88, higher now by 0.2%. Nasdaq up 51. That is a gain of 0.3%. 10-year 4.62%, with a 2-year now yielding 4.97%. Spot gold today is trading a little change unchanged, up $5.50 the ounce to $23.42, up by about 0.2%. And a retreat today for West Texas Intermediate crude oil, down 1%, $82.97 a barrel on WTI. SoFi Technology shares are trading lower now. We've got SoFi down by 10.2% after the online bank gave guidance for second quarter revenue and earnings that were less than analysts expected. Again, SoFi now lower by 10.1%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 15, up 0.3%. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where everyone's peeking out of one eye today after a blistering White House Correspondents' Dinner weekend. It also happens to be 90 degrees in the nation's capital. And I'll tell you what, no hangover helper like a little climate for you. So we've got a lot to talk about today. Lawmakers are back. We discussed that, obviously, with Jonathan Tamari, Maya McGinnis. We're going to be hearing about an FAA extension and talking more about that with lawmakers throughout the week. And then there's the campaign trail. RFK Jr.'s up in Boston today. Kennedy country, they say. And he's going to be tapping the ATM up there with a fundraiser at 6:30 tonight. It's kind of interesting what's going on, though, because, of course, the balance of the Kennedy family has endorsed Joe Biden aggressively and have tried to make the difference between the two candidates. But there's money to be had in Boston, where apparently he's going to be spending time with Donnie Wahlberg and Jenny McCarthy. Josh Wingrove joins us now, Bloomberg White House correspondent. I'm not sure either of them were at the dinner, but it's interesting. In Boston, you can be with a lot of different celebrities as a Kennedy. Those typically would not be the two. And it might say something about the candidate in this case.
Am I your Donnie Wahlberg in this?
Well, I'd like to think so, yeah.
I mean, Kennedy has been appealing for cash pretty aggressively lately, so I think his bar is probably a little lower than he might be. The backstory here, though, of course, is he was a primary challenger to Biden, right? No one really paid him any mind. Biden ignored him. It didn't go anywhere. Democrats closed ranks. What's happened in the last few weeks, and just over a month or so, he's really starting to get traction as a third-party candidate, in particular on the ballot access point, meaning people are actually going to have the chance to vote for him in states that matter. Michigan is a big one that jumps to mind, and the money that they're raising is for that. They say they need money to continue these legal efforts. The rules, of course, are different in every state. Some states you need a certain amount of signatures in each county or each whatever congressional district. So that is their push right now, but it's really interesting. I don't think we're talking about this enough. CNN had a poll over the weekend showing 16% for Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, the Quinnipiac Act gave him 14 or something in that same realm.
And the question, so like that separates him from other third-party candidates who are smaller numbers but take more heavily from Joe Biden. Right now, the question is, who is Kennedy getting these votes from? And will this turn swing states one way or the other? Will it turn non-swing states into swing states by turning them into three-way races? Yes, right. That's certainly Kennedy's goal right here. But it's a fascinating one right now, and you've got both Biden and Trump racing to define this guy, because if you can split that 16%, 10-6 instead of 8-8, that can be decisive.
Fascinating. That we're hearing from both of these candidates, Donald Trump attacking RFK Jr. as more liberal than the others.
Lefty
we've already heard plenty when the Kennedys went to visit the White House and so forth from Joe Biden. But polling has indicated that unless there's name confusion, there's much more overlap with Trump supporters, right? I mean, when it comes to the vaccine stuff and the sort of protectionist approach here, wouldn't really have a lot in common with a Joe Biden voter, would he?
The money also suggests that Republicans are funding Mr. Kennedy, and that suggests that some of them see him as a potential stalking horse for Mr. Trump. I think, right now the question is, what do people know about RFK Jr.? A lot of people know his name. Yeah, right. So Democrats right now are racing to say, hey, he's not that much of a Kennedy anymore. All the other Kennedys like us. Pay attention to these Kennedys, not the Kennedy behind the curtain. And that includes a super PAC that's been set up by Biden allies to define third parties. It's essentially an RFK super PAC. The DNC has a little team trying to work on ballot access integrity, which is basically like making sure Kennedy is dotting his I's and crossing his T's to get on ballots. And then Biden himself in his campaign arranging that events with the Kennedys. And then Trump has really ramped it up in the last 48 hours or so, which suggests that someone has warned Trump that this could backfire. But our poll shows that Trump's voters, either now or previously, people who voted for Trump, really like Kennedy more than Democrats do. And so right now, both parties are just racing to paint him as the opposite. So you're going to see Democrats talking about his views on abortion, for instance. He identifies as pro-choice, but also wants far fewer abortions than there are currently. They talk about his vaccine stance. Of course, he's a prominent promoter of vaccine conspiracy theories and doubts. And so they're basically trying to push him to Trump's camp. Trump's pushing him back the other way.
Donald Trump posts on Truth Social that RFK Jr. is a Democrat plant and would be a wasted protest vote. So Kennedy writes back to him on Twitter, "When frightened men take to social media, they risk descending into vitriol, which makes them sound unhinged. President Trump's rant against me is barely coherent." He goes on to challenge him to a presidential debate. And I only bring this up because obviously these guys are not going to make that deal now. But there are questions about whether there are going to be debates at all. You cover Joe Biden for a living. There are a lot of concerns about how Trump could be fact-checked or how Joe Biden could keep up with some sort of live fact-checking, whether it's worth it if he's not going to acknowledge the rules. But Josh, if there were debates and RFK Jr.'s clocking in at 15% on some polls, you got 3 podiums up there potentially.
Potentially. I think the RFK question is a separate question from the debates. Now, Biden went on Stern.
He sure did.
And he seemed to indicate there that he'd be willing to debate Trump.
Yeah.
It's a little unclear, maybe open to interpretation, but certainly he seems to be doing that. Trump is goading Biden into debate. I mean, he's like, guns blazing.
Even though they don't want to use the commission, right? They don't want the same moderators.
So
we're on different planets here.
One of the absolute options on the table here is that they haggle over terms forever and we never get a debate or it comes very late. I think both candidates at least want to be seen to be wanting to debate each other. So we'll see. But if they do get down to this haggling, the question of whether Kennedy will be included or not, I think really scrambles the egg. And so right now it might depend on where he ends up being. Is Kennedy still at 16% in September? Much different story than 16% in April. Remember, we're talking about a map of maybe even 3 or 4 states deciding this thing.
Right.
States
That's
where
why the
there's
Michigan
100,000 or fewer votes. That's why Michigan is so important. Although I will note, in our poll, with small sample sizes in individual states, so many grains of salt, Joe Biden has a lead in Michigan in our poll.
He's up too, right?
And it grows to 3 when you include RFK. So right now, RFK is helping Joe Biden in Michigan.
There's a hard number that we can actually talk about
but
with
a very
impact.
small one.
Boy, it sure
but
is.
a very small one.
1 point. It's, within the margin, obviously. I think there was a 1-point margin of error in our poll here. Josh Wingrove is with us, Bloomberg White House correspondent. You were at the correspondents' dinner that I referenced over the weekend. There were a lot of questions about Joe Biden being up late, whether it was going to be funny. Seems like the comedian's getting more criticism than the president this morning. And you don't need to weigh in on that. But how did Joe Biden do? Did it resonate in living rooms?
Well, I don't know if he has as much Pedialyte under the desk as you do right now. No, I'm joking.
I've heard that reference a lot today.
Biden kept it short and sweet. I think the reviews have been mostly positive, taking a dig at Trump. You also saw him take a dig at the media, right? Jointly, he's paying homage to press freedom, which is good. We all welcome that. And I should note, of course, members of the WHCA, including myself, love having the president there. Biden came, Biden comes to them. Trump never did when he was president.
Absolutely.
The thinking, of course, is that Trump may not if he's president again. So all that is welcome. This dinner funds scholarships for young journalists, so it has an important purpose, at least in my view.
Thank you for saying that.
But Biden, he kept it short, kept it sweet, but clearly thinks that the press are misframing, to his estimation, this election, and that Trump, in Biden's view, is so much more of an existential threat that he'd like the coverage to reflect that. But Biden has been going around traditional White House media to places like Howard Stern. And that's why we've seen some discourse in the last couple of weeks about him not talking to the New York Times, him not talking to the, so he took a dig at that as well. Generally, I think Biden's speech, short, sweet, got pretty good reviews. Colin Joe's speech, I think, is a little more mixed reviews this time. But, they all got their digs in there. Remember Joe saying that maybe Jimmy Carter should give it a try, age 96, with the ages of these 2 candidates right now.
Could you keep them from putting more tables in that room? I think they're going to start putting them on top of each other now. That was just a massive humanity.
This is a great dinner to go to.
Never have imagined during COVID.
If you need a spinal adjustment by having 20 people carrying large trays ram into you over and over, it's a great dinner to be at.
Think of it as chiropractic.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, 2,600 people in that room. It's
Is that the number?
It's a big number. Yeah, 2,600 people. Now we should note, obviously, there were a lot of protesters outside. There's usually protesters. Previous years was climate and other issues.
Yeah.
Some big protests
They
over
seemed a lot
Gaza.
closer, a lot louder than usual.
They did, and I should note, no one really. The comedic jokes did not go there. So some subjects were seen as, not appropriate to be cracking jokes at. Obviously, a very serious situation on that one. But
changes the tenor.
It is a big weekend for Washington. So yeah, everyone I think enjoyed themselves. I hope.
I can only imagine how many parties he went to before and after. Look, if you're with us on YouTube, this is your chance to see Josh Wingrove at the same height as I. But I know for a fact that he was the only guy who could see over all the sea of humanity to know what was happening in the room. It's great to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Always welcome.
Happy Monday.
Josh Wingrove, everybody, on Bloomberg. Find his work on the terminal and on the website. We'll assemble the panel next. Rick and Jeannie are with us on this Monday after we get world and national news. Let's start there right now with Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Riyadh, stepping up efforts to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in what may be a last-ditch effort to persuade Israel to not invade the city of Rafah. Bloomberg News Director for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, Rosalind Matheson.
There's not a lot of goodwill on either side. The talks are still very fragile. They're now happening under extreme pressure, given the imperative to try and get some sort of deal to avoid that Rafah offensive. And the question is, what can the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken bring to the table in those conversations? It's unclear what else the U.S. can do to lean on Israel to get to a deal.
Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson. The U.S. and its allies are concerned that the International Criminal Court may issue arrest warrants for Israeli officials just as the country is getting closer to a ceasefire agreement with Hamas. Sources say the worry is that Israel would back out of a truce if the ICC proceeds with the warrants. A group of House Democrats is calling on Columbia University leaders to end the ongoing pro-Palestinian encampment on the campus. Representatives Josh Gottheimer of New Jersey and Dan Goldman of New York led the group of 21 Democrats in a letter to Columbia's board members demanding that they end the encampment or step down from their positions. The ongoing protest over the Israel-Hamas war has led to allegations of anti-Semitism and safety concerns on campus. The New York Times reports university officials have now given student protesters until 2 p.m. to leave. We're watching that for you. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 12:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the green right now. A 16-point advance on the S&P, now at 51.16, up by about 0.3%. The Dow also higher by 0.3%, up 119 points. While NASDAQ is up 55, higher now by 0.3% as well. 10-year at 4.62% with a 2-year 4.97%. Spot gold up $5.50 the ounce to $23.43, up 0.2%. And a retreat for crude oil today, now at 83.13 on West Texas Intermediate crude oil, lower today by 0.9%. Stocks are higher as a solid earnings season props up the market despite bets that the Federal Reserve will keep rates higher for longer. Wall Street, of course, looking ahead to Wednesday's Fed rate decision at Jay Powell's news conference. Jay Bryson is chief economist at Wells Fargo Bank. He says the Fed could move in September despite the proximity to the presidential election.
Does the election just freeze September? No. The Fed would prefer not to be moving in September. But if you do see, a significant deceleration in the economy, if you do see the 3-month annualized rate of inflation coming back down to 2.5%, 2%, you could potentially see a rate cut in September.
Jay Bryson of Wells Fargo Bank. Mining giants BHP Group and Vale have offered to pay Brazil about $25.7 billion in total compensation for a 2015 tailings dam disaster at their joint venture iron ore complex. Shares today of BHP, the ADRs, they're up 0.2%. ADRs of Vale, they're up by 1.2%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 13, up 0.3%. Balance of power continues. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Charlie Pellet, thank you. Welcome back today. It's great to have you in the mix. Live from New York, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Welcome to Balance of Power, the Monday edition. Coming up a little bit later on this hour, a special conversation with the White House climate advisor. Ali Zaidi is in New York and will join our conversation a bit later on here as we continue to focus on the campaign trail. Donald Trump, it was back in January. Remember, we went through Iowa and New Hampshire together, and the surprise drop of Ron DeSantis before anyone even had a chance to move on from the first in the nation primary state. When he dropped out, Donald Trump said he was retiring the name once and for all, Ron DeSanctimonious. After spending months disparaging and embarrassing the governor of Florida. And a lot of people wondered if he would ever spend time with him again. Would they ever talk again? They actually did, we can tell you. They got together over the weekend, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis in a room in Hollywood, Florida, with a lot of money potentially on the line for the Trump campaign. Let's assemble our panel. They also survived the weekend. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, what's the purpose of this meeting? Is it about unlocking money for Trump or trying to make Ron DeSantis look reformed so he can someday run again?
Well, it's really all about Donald Trump. He has pretty serious financial woes, and he's bringing together these 400 donors to really kind of re-energize his effort to do large donor fundraising. It's a real recognition that his vaunted small dollar donations that have kept him afloat since 2015 are petering out. And so these are things that he never had to do, when he ran for re-election in 2020. He is kowtowing to the rich and famous, and he's got 400 of them coming to Palm Beach. And Ron DeSantis is just sort of additive in the tank, right? I mean, he is reaching out to everybody who's got donors to make them his own. Ron DeSantis raised a lot of money, both for governor and for his presidential campaign, from people who have not been giving money to Trump. And so that is an even more important aspect to get Ron DeSantis to convert those people, Ken Griffins of the world, people like that, into Trump donors. No telling what deals are cut, but sounds like Ron's on board.
That's incredible. Jeannie, he may have retired Ron DeSanctimonious, but he never retired Meatball Ron, to my memory. Why would Ron DeSantis be compelled to sit down with him?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing we've seen repeatedly with Republicans. I think the one I'm waiting for now is to see if we see anything like this. You know, we just had the Pennsylvania primary and Nikki Haley did pretty well, even though she's not running anymore. So do we see sort of a similar bury the hatchet moment with her? But, you know, Ron DeSantis, he wants to be a member of this party and run again in the future. That's why he got out when he did. And of course, this is a really prolific fundraiser in Ron DeSantis. So Donald Trump needs him. He needs his supporters. So they are all getting together to play golf and do what they do down there with the big investors and try to get this campaign back in good shape financially. He is really, to Rick's point, been struggling financially, of course, in large part because he owes so much money to lawyers.
Well, we're hearing a lot about the Veep stakes these days. I don't know if we're counting Kristi Noem out after the puppy story. You guys can weigh in on that if you wish. Reporting over the weekend would suggest Doug Burgum is running high on the list now. But they're all going to be pulled together in this sort of weird episode of The Apprentice. And I'm kind of wondering if they're going to be filming this thing, Rick. Marco Rubio, Tim Scott, the aforementioned Kristi Noem, Elise Stefanik, Byron Donalds, and yes, Doug Burgum are all going to be appearing at this donor retreat that we're talking about in Palm Beach, Florida. You've been through the process before, vetting potential vice presidential candidates. What's Donald Trump looking for? Because I keep hearing geography doesn't matter, the normal rules don't apply.
Yeah, geography hasn't mattered for a long time, and this is the cattle call, right? This is the effort that presidential candidates, nominees like to have these folks around, to look like they're being interviewed, to look like there's a process going on. And so that's what you're seeing here. It's pretty standard operating procedure. I would say Governor Noem really created a new standard. It used to be in Washington, if you want a friend, get a dog. Now in South Dakota, it's if you want a friend, shoot a dog. I mean, I just couldn't resist.
Wow, Jeannie, I don't know if you can top that one.
Well, I just hope Rick would cover Bindi's ears when she's hearing this kind of talk out of there. Poor Bindi. You know, listen, Cricket, rest in peace. What a horrible story. I mean, it's
wild.
So mind-numbing. And you know, we had the New York Post up here reporting it's one thing that draws all Americans together is you can't be VP if you're shooting 14-month-old puppies. And then talking about it as if it's a way to waltz into the White House. So yeah, Joe, I will stop on that now. But, you know, we'll see. She's been trolled. I love the fact that DeSantis has trolled her. Carrie Lake has trolled her, the president, the vice president. I haven't seen you trolling her, but I don't suspect you will.
Well, I'll tell you what, Rick, that certainly makes the Mitt Romney dog on the roof story seem quaint in this campaign cycle. Is Donald Trump going to, drag this out to the end, or could he actually benefit by having somebody running at his side and supporting him at this moment?
No, I think he'll drag it out to the end. He'll need a little excitement in the summer to recharge the campaign and for the fall campaign. And it doesn't do him any good to have a candidate out there that, the Democrats are going to go after and beat up on. If anything, it's advantage Trump. He can, beat up on the ticket the Democrats have, and all they can do is criticize him. And in this case, probably more than any other modern election, it's all about Donald Trump. It's almost irrelevant who he picks as far as an electoral decision is made. He's not going to pick up votes that he doesn't already have, and he's not going to lose any votes that he's already got. So the VP thing for him is just about who does he want personally. It's got no real political value whatsoever.
Well, with apologies to Bindi, if you're with us on YouTube, you know Bindi. Sleeping right behind Rick most of the time in his palatial office. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, our signature panel. They'll be back next hour. We're going to talk about what's happening on Capitol Hill, the motion to vacate, and all of the rest with Rick and Jeannie. Insights from the weekend as we turn our attention to an important story. It is 90 degrees today in Washington, D.C., the 29th of April. I do not say that to brag. Everyone's complaining about the heat. And it's going to be like this all week. And as we turn to the issue of climate change following the president's visit to Triangle, Virginia last week, with important news on a climate rule, an emissions rule for power plants, It's a pleasure to welcome back Ali Zaidi, the White House National Climate Advisor, to the broadcast. He's actually in New York today, where I suspect it's sweltering as well, at World Headquarters in Manhattan. Ali, it's great to see you.
Good to be with you.
90 today is going to be like this, I guess, the rest of the week. Are we going to have another record-breaking summer for heat?
Look, the projections of our new normal, whether it's extreme heat or the wildfire risk or hurricane season, which is soon to be upon us, are horrifying. That this is no longer a science paper. It's a reality that we're living, and I think we're going to experience it again this summer.
So let's talk about this new rule for power plants. This is important, and it's been so noisy around here lately, and certainly in the world of politics, that I don't think it got a lot of attention here. But the president, speaking about this new rule that will apply to at least new power plants and the level of emissions that they are allowed to emit. How come it does not also include existing power plants, Ali, or is that going to be in the next salvo here from the administration?
Yeah, the rule that was finalized last week by the Environmental Protection Agency covers existing coal plants as well as new build fossil fuel plants. What it doesn't cover, what the EPA is continuing to build evidence around, is existing gas plants. So, you know, I think this is going to be really meaningful in terms of slashing pollution from this sector and accelerating, I think, the scale up of clean energy technology in the decade ahead.
The Edison Electric Institute, the EEI, which is a power plant lobbyist, essentially was applauding that move. Was it your hope to have all of these in one big rule right now?
You know, we want to deliver, number one, as much regulatory certainty to the market as possible. That's why we've harmonized, for example, in the transportation sector, our tailpipe standards, our fuel economy rules, other rules that have implications for how people plan their businesses. Same thing in the power sector. We've sought to put together standards for example, mercury pollution, what you put into the water in terms of effluent limitation guidelines, limits on coal ash, all at once, so that there is a clear planning horizon and a clear set of rules. But, you know, the state of the art continues to evolve very rapidly in the power sector. We're getting more and more technologies that we can harness to cut pollution. And so the rules will have to adapt to that.
Spending time with Ali Zaidi from the White House. He is President Biden's climate advisor, with an eye across the country on a number of different issues. I have to ask you about LNG, of course, liquefied natural gas, and the administration's pause on LNG exports. Ali, can you give us an update on this review, and are you getting a sense of how long it will last?
Look, we expect that this will take several more months, but by the end of the year, early next, I think we'll be wrapped up in terms of getting the analysis done and updated. We really, I think, not pulled back to think through the implications for domestic energy costs for our manufacturers and what the implications are from a greenhouse gas perspective, not just here in the United States, but all around the world. The next few months of analytical work by the Department of Energy, national labs, experts from around the country will help us get, I think, a better handle before we continue to move forward in this domain.
Well, I wonder what that's going to look like, because you know that there are some critics here, some of the president's Republican critics have suggested that this is going to end up becoming a permanent ban. And we've talked with stakeholders in Europe about this who are wondering about the duration here, of course. Once that analysis is done, will there be an announcement by the administration? Here's what we learned and here's what we are now comfortable doing?
I think you're going to hear from the Department of Energy very specifically what they've learned in terms of impacts to frontline communities, energy security implications. I was just talking to some ministers from Europe last week about the implications of this for their energy security. I think they feel very, at least the conversations I had, to be on a firm foundation and very much in alignment with us, that we've got to measure what the implications are here. But you'll get the sort of environmental, economic, and national security implications from the DOE. And that, I think, will govern then subsequent decisions that follow.
I have less than a minute, Ali, and I don't mean to sneak up on you here, but there's been reporting that the president might eliminate an exception, a tariff exception for double-sided solar panels. This is something that the industry domestically has been asking for. Is that in the offing?
We are right now, I think, looking really hard at our trade policy broadly and in our solar industry in particular, figuring out how we tighten up the rules in a way that creates a more level playing field here and with producers abroad. You've got China really over capacity circumvention that's taken place in the past. And so we're looking at bifacial panels as well as other trade vectors.
Yeah. Let us know when you can come back and make some news on that, Ali. It's great to see you again. Ali Zaidi, White House National Climate Advisor. Stay cool in New York. I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
Okay, today I'm going to talk about how to succeed with a startup. Obviously, more than can be said here in 20 minutes, but I will do the best I can. The most important thing, the number one lesson we try to teach startups, is that the degree to which you're successful approximates the degree to which you build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it. Startups always ask us for the secret to success. They always want to believe it's something other than this, because this is really hard to do. But this is it. If you can build a product that is so good, people spontaneously tell their friends about it, you have done 80% of the work that you need to be a really successful startup. If you think about the most successful companies you know, Google, Facebook, whatever, you probably found out about them because a friend of yours said, you got to try this, it's great. So this is the bar. Something that people love so much they tell their friends about it. One important indicator for a product like that is a product that's simple to explain and easy to understand. If you can't explain in a few words what you do, and if at least some people don't say, oh, that's pretty interesting, that's usually a mistake. It's usually a sign of unclear thinking or a need that is not big enough.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need. Like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
of politics to the world of business. This is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Israel says it's open to a truce. Welcome to the fastest show in politics as Israel and Hamas inch closer to a possible hostage deal with backing from the U.S. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington. Welcome to the Monday edition of Balance of Power. Kaylee, the Secretary of State, is back in the region, going from Saudi Arabia to Jordan, indeed, to Israel.
Indeed, his 7th trip to the Middle East since October 7th, which was now almost 7 months ago, Joe, and it has been quite some time since we've seen any kind of actual organized brief pause in the hostilities between Israel and Hamas. But that is what negotiators, not just from those two sides as well as the U.S. are involved in, but the Egyptians and Qataris as well.
A lot of questions about who's at the table and what might be about to happen. It does appear, based on reporting at least, Kaylee, that Israel might be willing to accept a lower number of hostages, which could help to unlock a deal. But the shuttle diplomacy from Secretary Blinken might really play into any potential for something final happening. We're going to talk to Hagar Shamali coming up about that next.
Yeah, and we'll also talk about the ongoing protests at college campuses across the country, including Columbia University, while students who are camped out in the encampment have been given about less than 1 hour now until 2 p.m. today to leave the encampment. So certainly no shortage of drama happening there and elsewhere. We'll get to all of it on this program. First, though, as always, a check on the markets with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much, Kaylee. We are looking at an update here for the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, all in the green. 13-point advance right now on the S&P, up by about 0.3%. The Dow up 116, also up 0.3. NASDAQ right now higher by 0.3% as well. 10-year 4.61%, the 2-year 4.96%. Spot gold now higher by $6.50 the ounce, up by about 0.3%. 23.44 right now on the precious metal. West Texas Intermediate crude down 1.1%, 82.96 a barrel. Paramount Global shares higher after Bloomberg reported that the Redstone family and Skydance Media CEO David Ellison have both offered concessions to make a possible change in control at the media company more appealing to other investors. New York Times, meanwhile, says Skydance is offering a $3 billion cash infusion to sweeten the deal. We've got shares of Paramount Global. They're advancing right now by 3.5%. So again, recapping here, stocks are higher. S&P right now up 13, up 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York with a look at where we are as of 1-ish p.m. during this Monday trading session, kicking off the week. And of course, Joe, that puts us just about an hour from the deadline for students at Columbia University who have been in this encampment, of course, Palestinian protesters, some of them perhaps outright anti-Israel. Columbia putting out a note to students in that encampment today saying, please promptly gather your belongings, leave the encampment. If you voluntarily leave by 2 p.m., and sign a provided form where you commit to abide by all university policies through June of next year, 2025, you will be eligible to complete the semester in good standing.
Wow. This could be a dicey moment here. We've seen evictions of these encampments fall into violence more than once. They're certainly recovering from that in Austin and in Boston. The Speaker of the House was standing on that campus just days ago, Kaylee. This has really become the center of this, at least, campus angle on this story. And it's one that's very divisive. We spoke earlier with our White House correspondent, Josh Wingrove. The White House Correspondents' Dinner, actually, was the site of a pretty large pro-Palestinian protest, shouting at people as they went inside the party. They're trying to get as much coverage as they can with enormous pressure domestically here on Joe Biden. And that's where we start our conversation, Kaylee, with Hagar Shamali. The idea of a potential truce here, a breakthrough and a deal on hostages would be enormous for this administration and, of course, all the parties involved. Hagar is former National Security Council, where she specialized in Syria and Lebanon, now at Greenwich Media Strategies, where she is founder. Hagar, it's great to see you. Are we on the verge of a breakthrough?
Well, it seems very close. I mean, things have been very tenuous, and you've got pressure kind of building on both sides. And it looks hopeful. You have Secretary Blinken in Saudi Arabia today, where he has been working with them and has made the call on Hamas from there to accept this proposal, which he called, quote, extraordinarily generous. coming from the Israelis. And that's very significant because these talks have been going on for a while. And the fact is that they keep getting these proposals get narrower and narrower. And right now, the latest proposal from what we know is that it would include a lower number of hostages exchanged for Palestinian prisoners. And it would also allow Palestinians, Gazan civilians, to return to their homes in northern Gaza. And so hopefully it'll get somewhere. Hamas, for the last few proposals, has been the sticking point, and it feels as though, and Secretary Blinken has made a point of saying that. He reiterated that today, that it's on Hamas. Hamas is the one blocking a ceasefire. But I do have more hope for this one.
Well, of course, there's always risk of disruption, Hagar. And Bloomberg is reporting today that the U.S. and its allies are concerned that the International Criminal Court could soon issue arrest warrants for a number of Israeli officials, reportedly, according to other outlets, could include Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And the concern is that this would be something that really jeopardizes any kind of ceasefire deal. Just how problematic would that be? And is the ICC, in your mind, likely to put off something like that in the name of reaching an agreement?
When I saw that news, it surprised me mainly because of its timing. Typically, these types of issues happen, they take much longer. So, for example, when I handled Syria, it took the ICC much longer to issue an arrest warrant and to put President Assad, who is a butcher and murderous dictator, to put them on their list than it has the Israeli officials. I did see that the news would include both Israeli government officials and Hamas leaders. And that's also important because you obviously have Hamas leaders in Qatar right now, I believe in Turkey as well.
Sure.
And so it would include both, but it's very significant. You're talking about, it's almost like an international arrest warrant means that wherever they travel outside of their own country, they're going to get arrested. And sometimes within the country, if there is, for example, an uprising against Netanyahu, then they could also arrest him domestically. It just kind of depends how it goes. Israel's not a party to the ICC, so they probably wouldn't arrest him domestically. They wouldn't recognize it, but you never know how the future holds. But that said, the timing also, these are serious. The arrest warrants, it sounds a little bit like a game, but it's not. These are very serious things, and could definitely play out negatively. But I believe that the Israeli government at this time is so focused on what's happening with the ceasefire talks and in Gaza itself that they're probably not paying much attention to it. They're hoping that the U.S. is able to push the ICC to delay.
Well, the talks are supposed to begin Tuesday in Cairo here. And as the U.S. urges Hamas to accept a deal, Hagar, we don't even know if Hamas is going to be there. They haven't responded to questions about Israel's offer or whether it will send a delegation. So I guess we're going to learn imminently here if this is possible. We can't obviously move forward without Hamas, can we?
No, not really. No, you can't move forward without them. But that said, Israel is holding in its hand a very large stick. And that stick is going into Rafah, and they've made it very clear that they're not going to hold back, no matter what the U.S. or other international partners say about their desire to go into Rafah and to target the Hamas battalions and cells and leaders who they believe are still there. They've already pursued airstrikes against Rafah. They haven't pursued yet this ground invasion, and we know from satellite imagery that we've seen new tents erected to the north of Rafah. So it's believed that those tents are part of the Israeli plan to evacuate over 1 million people who are in Rafah. But that said, that is a very big threat and very credible threat that Israel holds, and that you can see them using that they're not afraid to go in, and the ceasefire deal is the only thing keeping them from pursuing that operation.
Well, we know that's part of the message that Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, is bringing to the region, trying to persuade Israel against an imminent invasion of Rafah, given how many hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million Palestinians could be caught up in that. Can we just talk about his role, though, as a mediator in all of these varying different areas with the Israeli government and IDF, with the other parties involved in these negotiations? He's been to the Middle East 7 times in less than 7 months, Hagar, and what does he really have to show for it?
Right, it's stunning. Well, I handled the Middle East, as you know, and I can tell you one of the common frustrations is that you can travel 1,000 times and you churn your wheels and you can create policy after policy, and and it can be very difficult to have any movement and break any ground. I personally wish to see from the U.S. government louder calls for the release of all hostages. But we have to remember there are apparently about 5 U.S. nationals as well taken hostage in Gaza right now, and one of whom was on the videos that were released by Hamas last week. And those videos came out only because Qatar pressured Hamas to release them, to give some kind of proof of life for individuals. And so the thing is, my answer to that is really that's just kind of how it goes. And to be fair, it would be similar whether it's in Russia or China. Those negotiations with sides that are either adversary, in this case, you've got a terrorist organization, which is even worse, are always going to be extremely difficult and tenuous. And also, by the way, with the Israeli government, also the conversations are always difficult. And you keep seeing these, they take inches forward. They make these steps forward, but they're unable to seal these deals. But the whole point is to try and get to some negotiation. All wars end in a negotiation, and showing that kind of effort is something that they have to do, because they have to try for it, even if it's far-fetched. But I do think that this time they are nearing something real.
Hagar, we have to ask you again about what's happening at Columbia University, something Kaylee was mentioning a bit earlier this hour, and we'll remind our listeners and viewers that you are a professor at Columbia's School of International and Public Affairs. 2 p.m. is the new deadline that authorities have provided students to break up their encampment and leave the central lawn so they can start preparing for graduation ceremonies in the middle of May. There are a lot of things I'd like to ask you about all this, including what you're hearing might happen today at 2 o'clock. But to what extent is this? You're at the microcosm here of this argument on the campus of Columbia University, the extent to which it's impacting national public opinion.
Yes, so what we're seeing is quite stunning, actually, and I really don't think any one of us could have expected things to go the way they did, with the protests at Columbia inspiring these other protests across the country, some of which have been very loud and have faced really some brutal crackdowns, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word, but where you're seeing the police arrest, and those arrests are not going very peacefully. I think that's the most accurate way I could say it. So what you have now, so on one hand, the way it's inspired these protests across the country came after Columbia invited the New York Police Department on campus to arrest the students there. And it ended up causing a backlash on campus that also inspired movements across the country. And I don't think it's going to end anytime soon. And this is the thing, I think a lot of folks hope that the professors are hoping, okay, but the summer is coming and then students are going to go home. But the administration seems to believe and expect that these protests are going to continue until the election, at least, and that they're going to use the election and the political banter and focus to highlight this issue even more. They're going to feel quite strongly about that. Now, if you're going to have a ceasefire now, or even if it delays and it's in a month or so, that is going to ease tensions a little bit. But the fact is that these protests have devolved into numerous demands. They are not just demanding divestment or for a ceasefire or against aid to Israel. They're demanding things like, at Columbia at least, they're demanding that they get rid of the exchange program we have with the University of Tel Aviv. They're demanding, they even included demands related to Harlem residents. The divestment has to do with it's not in Israeli companies, you're talking in American companies that work in Israel, for example, Google and Lockheed Martin and things like that. These are just not very realistic demands. And so they've reached this standoff and impasse. Yeah. They've reached an impasse is the right word. And I expect at 2 p.m., I do expect some students to accept to stay, and knowing that they might get arrested or that the security might take them off. They will be suspended if they stay past 2 p.m. And the university was clear that they've been able to identify who they are. That's not difficult, and that they will be suspended. And if they're suspended, then they're trespassing on the campus, and so they will be removed somehow. But I expect it to get very tense.
All right, Hagar Shamali is an adjunct professor at Columbia University, also the founder and CEO of Greenwich Media Strategies and formerly of the National Security Council. Thank you so much for joining us. No shortage, Joe, of intensity and drama in Upper Manhattan in recent days, and of course, plenty in Lower Manhattan as well. Not today, as it is a day off court in Trump's hush money trial, but it will resume tomorrow with more testimony and potentially a verdict on a gag order violation, or a multitude of them, coming later this week. And it's on that note now that we turn to June Grosso, who's the host of Bloomberg Law. So June, it's a day off in court today, but what should we be expecting tomorrow and Thursday and Friday?
Well, I think tomorrow it's going to be on the stand. When they left on Friday, it was turning toward what I'm going to call the paper part of the trial, because this is seems like it's not the most interesting part. Michael Cohen's former banker was on the stand, so I think they're going to start talking about the paperwork involved here. After all, this is a trial about falsifying business records, and the prosecution started off with this strong witness, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, to sort of set the stage and also to keep the jury interested right off the bat, right? You want to put a good witness up first. And from all accounts, he did really well on the stand and sort of established not only this tabloid world of checkbook journalism, which must have gotten the jurors' attention, but also the connection to Donald Trump and Donald Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. So that was very important. It's hard to know what's coming up because the prosecution is not revealing, as I mentioned before, the prosecution is not revealing the witnesses because they're afraid that Trump is going to say who the witness is, or perhaps give some kind of an indication in a text that the witness should behave or tell the truth or be nice. So they're not giving it out until the night before. And the judge is okay with that. So we don't know who's coming up after, but we'll see.
Checkbook journalism. I like that, June. That's just good. But what you're talking about is the real business of the trial. As you know, we only have about a minute, but it's important that you isolated this particular phase of the case. Let it be the boring paperwork phase, because that's actually, to your point, what this is, right? This is about doctoring documents when it comes down to this in the end, and election evasion. How will this impact the outcome this week?
Well, I mean, it's very important. These are the witnesses are coming up that are going to be critical. And I think that, you know, this is Michael Cohen's banker. Maybe Michael Cohen will be coming up soon after this. I mean, he's the main witness, and things are headed, you know, in that direction. But they want to do as much as possible to prop up Michael Cohen before he gets on the stand, because that is going to be a tough couple of days in the courtroom for Michael Cohen, because that, you know, he's the witness that the defense is going to put all their ammunition against. And they have let's face it, they have a lot of ammunition against Michael Cohen. We'll see how he, you know, holds up on the stand. But, you know, it's going to be a big week, too, because of the gag order. There's another hearing, yet another hearing about the gag order. And frankly, I don't know what the judge can do. He is very limited in his options.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Donald Trump doesn't know what the judge is going to do either. That's why he listens to Bloomberg Law every night at 6 o'clock, just like we do. June, thank you. We'll connect a little later this week on Bloomberg.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. what does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. Almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
When I was younger, I used to be in bands. I played drums in bands and toured America with them, did a lot of session drumming, recorded albums. So yeah, it was good fun doing the drumming. The only reason I stopped it, well, I still play, but not as serious as I did when I was younger, but drumming doesn't pay the bills. I was never good enough to be able to pay the bills with it, but it was good fun. I started RJF, and the reason I started it was I saw a gap in the market for particular early stage and startup businesses. With the experience that I've got of running businesses, of being a finance director at the very biggest companies in the world to being finance director of small startups, we were looking at providing more than just basic accountancy services. So yes, we'll do all that. We'll do all the basic, all the statutory side of things that you need to do. But there's so much more value that we can add, and I wanted to have my experience to help these startups, because a lot of them don't really know where to go. You can go to your high street accountants and they can do a good job compliance-wise, but you would question whether they've actually been in the fire line of a business. Have you been in a business where you're thinking, how do I pay wages next week? Or business is really successful, what do we do with it next? Or how do we grow it? How do we grow into international territories? Or how do we grow our markets? How do we expand? So a lot of the experience I've seen over the years and seen different types of business in different sectors, I thought, well, it's a real value that I can add to these businesses as opposed to just being an FD, because a lot of these businesses can't afford an FD. But if we can take care of their statutory side of things, the compliance side of things, I'm on hand to be able to help and advise businesses with their growth strategy, or if they're in difficulty, help them through these times.
Not, however, on the floor of the House that the Speaker, Mike Johnson, is making news. He took to Twitter just a few minutes ago to talk about what we're seeing happening on college campuses in Columbia, which we've discussed on this program, but elsewhere as well, saying we cannot allow the lawlessness we've seen recently on college campuses. Congress will take action to protect Jewish students and hold these pro-Hamas protesters accountable, Joe.
The idea would be cutting federal funding, which is something that he did float when he was on campus at Columbia. That was less than a week ago, right? I'm trying to remember if it was Wednesday last week, something like that. It's an idea that's come up before. I just wonder if he could potentially string together some sort of alliance of progressive left and conservative right to make that happen in the House. Is he going to cut a deal with Pramila Jayapal, or is this just messaging?
Well, it's an excellent question. And then even if you could form kind of an unusual coalition to get this done in the House, what would happen in the Senate? And what would the president do?
That's another big question. Yeah, I wonder how the panel feels about this. We've talked about these campus protests quite a bit and their political impact with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, and they are with us now. Bloomberg Politics contributors, our signature panel here on Balance of Power. Jeannie, what's your thought on this? When you hear Mike Johnson floating the idea of cutting federal funding for these universities, you, of course, work for Iona University, and you spend every day working with young people, many of whom are very upset about this. Now we've got a direct message coming out of Washington. Will it be any more than that?
You know, I think it possibly could be. So we have Mike Lawler from New York who has this draft of an anti-Semitism bill, if you will. It has bipartisan support. It requires the Department of Education to broaden its definition of anti-Semitism and to enforce the rules on the books after that redefinition, if you will. And, you know, Lawler has said he thinks it will help decrease the amount of intimidation of Jewish students on campus. And I think that's something that we could very well and should, in my mind, see bipartisan support for. So I think we may get some action like that. I think the one thing that we should keep in mind, well, two things from my perspective. Number one, as much as there is a lot of protests over the weekend and on college campuses, there are a lot of students who are protesting lawfully, and equally their rights to protest lawfully need to be protected. And of course, when you protest lawfully, you take the repercussions if you are arrested or thrown off campus, and they need to know that that is what happens as well. So I think there's a way to both support the right to speak and to certainly ensure against anti-Semitism or any kind of abuse of any student or any person in the country.
Well, so Rick, I guess it just begs the question on how easily this could happen in the United States Congress, where we'd love to talk on this program and others about how little they've been able to get done. Is this an issue where you could actually get enough like minds together to do something perhaps a little bit more drastic than you might expect?
Well, you've seen resolutions passed recently by the House in a bipartisan fashion, overwhelmingly condemning the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on these college campuses. So I don't think there's a lack of support. I think everybody's kind of hoping right now that with schools getting out, that it diminishes the nature of the debate here. Students go home, or there's less activity or public attention on these campuses, and that somehow this will abate. But the reality is we should have zero tolerance for this kind of behavior, you know, a month ago, today, or any time in the future. And so my guess is that we're in a period now with Congress where there are just going to be a bunch of messaging bills, right? Other than maybe FAA reauthorization and a couple other relatively minor things that will be very bipartisan. You're going to see the Democratic Party and the Republican Party putting up resolutions and bills that aren't expected to ever make it to the president's desk, but will make a very strong statement. I would anticipate this week getting something like that out of the House of Representatives from the Republican leadership. Frankly, even, you know, pressing the Democrats, especially the squad, you know, to take a vote on something that is very pro-Jewish, very anti-Semitism. And we'll see if that plays out politically.
Jeannie, as we've noted, Columbia's graduation is set for May 15th. We've already seen one major graduation ceremony canceled because of this nationally. If students don't leave at 2 o'clock, that's a half an hour away, should they be forcibly removed so the school can get on with its planning for graduation?
Yeah, I mean, this is what I'm talking about. One thing we teach students is you should speak your mind, but you need to do so lawfully. You need to do so peacefully. And when we protest peacefully, we have to accept the repercussions, which are if you are in violation of the law, you have to go peacefully with police officers who will escort you out. And in this case, the added issue here is that these are students, if they want to finish, you know, the semester, which is what Columbia is allowing them to do if they leave peacefully by 2, the threat is if they do not leave peacefully, they may not be able to get their credits for this semester or graduate in the future. That is what you have to accept if you are going to protest. And so, yes, I think that the university will have to take steps. You simply cannot protest and expect to disrupt everybody else's lives. And so they are going to have to accept whatever those repercussions are. But again, if the police come in, they need to do so peacefully, keeping in mind, by the way, that all of these protesters are not students. There are many outside agitators, and that has complicated this as well.
Yeah, it's a very good point, Jeannie, and point well taken as well on the fact that some actions have consequences, whether or not you are prepared to meet them. Speaking of consequences for actions, Rick, as Congress comes back this week, we all are still kind of dealing with the question as to whether or not Mike Johnson is going to face a real motion to vacate as consequence for passing aid for Ukraine and other U.S. allies before the break. Are we about to find out that Marjorie Taylor Greene was just bluffing?
Yeah, I think sometimes you're going to get called on the sky is falling strategy, and maybe that's the case. The reality, I think, that she has come to conclude is that even if she pulls the trigger on the motion to vacate, there are going to be enough votes to keep him from getting thrown out, and probably likely, with the help of the Democrats, the motion wouldn't even go to its maturity. It would just be tabled. So nothing looks weaker than pulling the trigger on something like this and then nothing happens. That kind of takes away her ability to ever try this again. I'm sure she understands that. The one thing she knows is how to get attention. If she wants attention in the future, she can't diminish herself too much, although there's a new level for that every day in the House of Representatives. But the reality is there's no consequence to her anymore, at least not until after November. And so regardless of what she does, Johnson's going to be Speaker for the balance.
It's Marjorie Monday, Jeannie. I don't know what timeline we're looking at here, but the last thing she said was his days as Speaker are numbered. Is she talking about, to Rick's point, the end of this Congress?
Yeah, I wouldn't pretend to know what Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about. It was interesting to hear Joe Biden raise her name as well in the context of his jokes at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. So, she's gotten her fair share of attention. But I think the real fact is that this is going to be all up to Hakeem Jeffries if she does pull the trigger. And I do think Democrats, we heard from Jared Moskowitz, for instance, over the weekend saying, Democrats obviously will follow Hakeem Jeffries, but they are inclined not to allow her to do this. I think Jared Moskowitz said we wouldn't even let her name a post office, let alone remove a speaker. What that happens to him after that, if he's saved by Democrats, I don't know what that means for him going forward in his own caucus. But I think all eyes on Hakeem Jeffries if she does pull the trigger on this.
Well, a lot of it comes down to Donald Trump, too, right? Who hasn't outright, I guess, said absolutely no to the idea of vacating the speaker, but has come to Mike Johnson's defense not once, but twice. Is it ultimately the former president that is going to make the call for her, Jeannie?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Mike Johnson, have you ever seen somebody hug anybody as close as Mike Johnson is hugging onto Donald Trump right now? He knows that the closer he gets to Trump, the less likely she's going to pull the trigger or he'll get kicked out. So that is the strategy. She's probably trying to draw a wedge between them. It's going to be crazy to watch in the next couple of weeks as Congress is in session for 4 weeks, theoretically, if they stay that long.
It's like a lot of work for them. 4 weeks in a row.
That can change, by the way. Let's see if they really make it to 4 weeks.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, Bloomberg's politics contributors, of course, our signature political panel kicking things off on this Monday. It is a question, though, Joe, of even if they stay all 4 weeks, how much gets done in a 4-week period?
Well, that's true. And I will note this moment in which we just went through a whole conversation about the rest of the congressional agenda and stablecoin never came up. That's
fair point.
Something to note.
Yes. That effort is probably still ongoing. It's just a question of whether it can get across the finish line and through what vehicle if it's not the FAA reauthorization. So that's a story we'll continue to keep on top of for you. And we're keeping on top of a lot of other stories as well in world and national news, or at least Amy Morris is. She's in our 99.1 newsroom here in Washington. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Kaylee, and the clock is ticking. You're absolutely right. Columbia University giving students until 2 o'clock to clear out from the pro-Palestinian encampment that they've occupied on a central lawn on its campus for nearly 2 weeks.
Lost.
The school has warned them they'll face immediate suspension if they don't leave. The move is an attempt to clear the encampment without calling in police. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, meanwhile, returning to Israel to try to secure a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. Blinken stopped in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he said China's support of Russia's invasion of Ukraine is not sitting well with European nations.
It's also fueling the greatest challenge to European security since the end of the Cold War.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken's trip to Israel comes after Hamas released new video showing American and Israeli hostages still being held. The images have sparked new calls for the Netanyahu government to secure a ceasefire. The U.S. and its allies are concerned that the International Criminal Court may issue arrest warrants for Israeli officials just as the country is getting closer to a ceasefire agreement with Hamas, potentially jeopardizing a possible deal. Sources say the worry is that Israel would back out of a truce if the ICC proceeds with the warrants, and the group of 7 nations started quiet diplomatic efforts to convey that message. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
Another thing that startups need to look for is a market that is either started to undergo or is soon going to undergo exponential growth. I think this is actually related to one of the biggest mistakes investors make when evaluating startups. Investors always say, well, what's your growth rate? We care about the growth rate. Investors will forgive smallish revenue today if it's growing quickly. For some reason, people don't think about markets this way. But if you think about the most important startups, they are the ones that I start in small markets that are growing very, very quickly. 11 years ago, the market for iPhone apps was $0. It's now huge. And I think if you only think about the TAM today, you'll make a big mistake. What you really want to do is identify a market that's going to grow every year and be able to ride that up elevator.
I want a bank that shows me what I spend instantly.
We're Monzo. Give us a go. See?
I want a bank that can help me budget for the things I need, like a new leather jacket for Bingo.
We can do that.
Bingo's my cockapoo.
Hi, Bingo.
It's a real faff to sign up.
It takes less than 10 minutes.
Race you.
You're on. Time's up. How'd you get on?
It's a draw.
Is it? We hear you, Bingo. You make Monzo Monzo.
My general advice is continue to seek out companies or people that are maybe one stage or two stages ahead of you. And I think this is generalizable to not just to startups, but anyone seeking fast growth in their own professional lives, in their careers too. What does greatness look like? Try to seek out people who've been there, done that before, and then try to not connect with one, but try to interview 3, 5, 10 people to see what is a general pattern of greatness that look like that will get you to the next level of the company, next stage, maybe a year, 12 months from now, 24 months from now. Seek out people who kind of went down that path a few times. Then you'll start to find this pattern that start to emerge. What are things that you need to have 12 months from now, 24 months from now that you currently don't have? Then try to like build a path towards that. It's almost like Amazon's or Jeff Bezos' mantra of working backwards. Think about what your end game or next stage look like, and then figure out your steps to getting there, and who do you need to work with, upgrading or coaching your existing team or recruiting from somewhere else to really level your leadership. Because ultimately, the job of a CEO is to do 3 things, right? One is get the strategy right for your company, making sure it's executed, get the right teams onboarded, getting the resources, whether it be fundraising or allocating your resources. So it's strategy, people, or team, figuring out how you need to navigate those things to get to the next level.
The comedian of the evening talking about how nice it was to see the president of the United States in an event which didn't begin with a bailiff saying, all rise, basically suggesting that Donald Trump is spending a lot of days in the courtroom today. Not today, and he won't Wednesdays. Wednesday is the days off of this trial, but Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday and Thursday, of course, is the gag order hearing, the second one, where the judge will hear arguments as to whether or not Trump is in violation of that gag order that is supposed to prohibit him from doing things like disparaging witnesses, and the prosecution says he's been doing a lot of that.
Well, that's right. The reporting from inside the courtroom has actually been quite lively on the daily basis. A lot of questions about the essence of this trial, Kaylee, of course, with the 4 potential trials that this former president, could endure here. This was always seen as the weakest by a lot of the folks we talked to. I think Nick Ackerman might be an exception there who really cites the strength of this case, but defining it has been a real problem for a lot of people. What is it actually that Alvin Bragg is bringing Donald Trump into court for? Is this a manipulation of documents case, a falsifying documents case, or is it an election interference case, or is it actually both?
I think they're trying to make the argument that it's actually both. Yes, he falsified business records, facing 34 counts of that, but it's a felony because it was done so with the intent to violate election law, is our understanding. But of course, Jim Zirin probably has a better understanding than we do because he is a legal professional, former assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York. Jim, it's always great to have you here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Joe brings up an interesting point because a lot of the questioning of witnesses that we saw last week, included David Pecker, was around whether or not this really was intended to help Trump politically. So far, do you think the prosecution is having success making that case?
Well, I think Pecker was a very damaging witness against Trump. He professes to be a friend of his to this day, and Trump may conclude with friends like that who needs enemies. Because Pecker really set the table. He put flesh on the bones of the whole case of how from the time Trump first announced for the presidency The National Enquirer was publishing damaging information about his political rivals and also trying to take polls that weren't necessarily accurate, which showed that Trump would be a viable candidate, as later he turned out to be.
How difficult will it be for Alvin Bragg, or are you already seeing the path here to make this an election interference case at the same time?
Well, I'm not convinced that calling an election interference case is the greatest way forward. It is an election interference case, and there are political or legal scholars in my respect, like Norm Eisen, who first brought it out and who stressed it's the 2016 preview to what happened in 2020, making fraudulent statements in order to seize power. So there is a parallel there. But I'm not so sure the jury is willing to buy that because it plays into Trump's claim that this is all a political prosecution. There is the other side of the coin. This is really a business integrity case. It's a simple case. It's a case of falsifying business records with the intent to commit a crime. The crime being either election interference or tax fraud or both federal and state election interference. Now, that in mind, there really isn't that much to it. You have 34 obviously false documents, business records of the Trump Organization, which are the mute witnesses that really put Trump in the soup. He falsified those documents. He knew about those documents. 7 of the 9 checks he personally signed. There is testimony of Michael Cohen, whose credibility they will challenge, but Cohen's testimony is going to be corroborated. First corroborated by Pecker. It'll be corroborated by other witnesses as the prosecution moves along. So I don't think it's that difficult a case if Bragg plays his hand deftly and emphasizes that it's a white-collar crime case. My old boss in the U.S. Attorney's Office, Bob Morgenthau, the legendary prosecutor, used to say, you can't prosecute the streets unless you prosecute the suites. And suites, S-U-I-T-E-S, and meaning the business suites. And he did. Other prosecutors have. And that makes this case not that unusual and not a selective prosecution where they've singled out Trump, but rather a prosecution that's a garden variety case involving business integrity.
Yeah. Except this one just happens to involve a former president and current presumptive Republican nominee. But I do take your point, Jim. Of course, there's something else in regard to this case. In addition to witness testimony that we're waiting for this week, on Thursday, we will have a second hearing of arguments related to whether or not Trump has violated the gag order he is under. Even more counts of this, according to the prosecution, have come up since the last time Judge Merchan heard these arguments. But what can he actually do here? What consequence does this ultimately have if he is found to have violated it and gets, what, $1,000 fine for each thing? That's not really a big number for a billionaire.
Well, let me get to that for a moment, but I want to answer you because he is the former president of the United States, and never before in history has a former president of the United States been charged with felonies. But the law is not supposed to be about who the defendant is. The law is supposed to be about what the defendant does. And that's what this case is all about. Now, as to the gag order hearings, I don't believe that the judge is going to clap Trump in irons and put him in jail for a day, for an hour, or for a year for violating a gag order. I think he'll be very tough on Trump and say the next time it happens, it's going to be very difficult for you. But I think he will fine him. He doesn't have to limit himself to a fine. He can put him in jail for contempt of court, even if the DA hasn't asked for that. but the DA has been very moderate. He's asked to fine him. There's really the issue of delay, because if he puts him in jail for any significant period of time, it's going to delay the trial. And that's the last thing the judge wants. That's the last thing the prosecutor wants. Undoubtedly, Trump will appeal, and undoubtedly, by the time the appeal is heard, they'll say Trump has served enough time. Let's go on with the trial. But it may delay the trial for 30 to 60 days, which nobody wants. So I think that there probably will be a fine imposed, and there probably will be a very stern Dutch uncle talk from the judge that what he's done violated the order, what he's done in terms of attacking witnesses and the families of prosecutors is intolerable and violates the order. And next time he does it, the judge is going to be very hard on him.
Jim, we're out of time. Just very quickly, just to make sure that our listeners and viewers understand, and I'm asking you legitimately, if you or I were in that position, if we had violated the gag order to that extent, what would happen to us?
I think we'd go to jail. No question about it. And
so then Trump, obviously then the law does not apply equally already. We've established that.
I think we've seen, as we saw in the immunity argument in the Supreme Court, Trump has gotten a deference from the courts unlike anyone else in a country where no man is supposed to be above the law.
Yeah.
All right, Jim Zirin, former Assistant U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Always great to have you on the program, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, today is not a trial day. Trump is getting a day off, but proceedings will resume tomorrow. Meantime, Congress just had several days off after they passed that supplemental funding and foreign aid. They took a recess, and now they're back in town and will be in town for 4 weeks, allegedly. The question is, how much are they going to get done in that time? Jack Fitzpatrick, who covers Congress for Bloomberg Government, is joining us now, hopefully with an answer. So, Jack, they're back. What's the first order of business?
Well, they still have things on their to-do list despite taking care of some of the major things. Yes, the government is funded through September 30th, but in the near future, by May 10th, they need to reauthorize the Federal Aviation Administration. That's something that the Senate is supposed to work on soon, and then the House will try to pass that bill. They just put a bill out last night with bipartisan support. So that's probably the number one thing. They've got the affordable connectivity program, the affordable broadband access that there is interest in renewing that's supposed to expire in the next couple of days. But that's not, that doesn't have a vote teed up just yet. So that's an unknown. And of course, when they finished funding the government through September 30th, they were already late for the next year. So they do have to negotiate the basics of how much money they're going to spend in fiscal 2025. There's a little more symbolic stuff. There's an anti-Semitism bill that directs the Department of Education on how to interpret the meaning of the word anti-Semitism. That may get a vote this week in the House. So a number of things on the to-do list that aren't quite as threatening as them struggling to avoid a shutdown, but theoretically they still should be productive over the next few weeks here in Congress.
I know it's 90 degrees in Washington today, Jack, and we're all getting ready for summer at some point around here. But there's a lot of talk about Christmas trees on Capitol Hill. If this FAA extension happens, how many ornaments will be added to it?
That is a good question. That is always a concern. The sort of proverb here in Congress is if you weigh down the Christmas tree with too many ornaments, then it's tough to pass. It's not going to pass. This was a wide-ranging bill that was released last night, but it was basically an FAA and related measures kind of bill. We have not yet heard of things being attached that would tank its chances of passing. There are always members who want to do that. But given that they negotiated a bipartisan measure that the Senate wants to work on passing and then the House, it should not be impossible for congressional leaders to be disciplined and not allow too many things. If you want to legislate and you've got something you really dearly want, there will be other legislative deadlines, maybe after the election. But it is a concern always with a major bill, but not something that looks like it's going to tank this bill.
And finally, Jack, as you're on the Hill right now, you sensing any vibes around tension surrounding this motion to vacate? Is anyone looking around thinking, how long has Mike Johnson got in the job? Or did everyone come back from recess basically under the opinion that Marjorie Taylor Greene is backing off?
It's not entirely clear if Marjorie Taylor Greene is actively backing off. She has still not triggered the vote itself that she could trigger to require that vote on the fate of the speaker. It may be a bit of a moot point other than taking up floor time. The Democrats appreciate the fact that they allowed a vote on the foreign aid series of bills that were packaged together. Johnson does not appear to be in dire straits. If there are a few members led by Marjorie Taylor Greene who want to demand a vote, there may be pushback from their colleagues. It does not seem to be something that will change the fate of the speaker. It is possible that the vote will happen. It may get some attention for some members, but nothing has changed in terms of Johnson still at least having some appreciation from Democrats who don't want to see him kicked out over allowing a vote on Ukraine aid.
Jack Fitzpatrick with us from the Hill. Great update, Jack. His reporting at Bloomberg Government is the one you want to watch, specifically when it comes to appropriations. It's great to see you, Jack, for everything that's happening in Congress here. Of course, Kaylee, really important development late in the program here as Speaker Mike Johnson calls for action against college campuses where we're seeing these pro-Palestinian protests, one of which in 5 minutes is going to be up for eviction on Columbia's campus.
Yep, 2 p.m. was the deadline for students to leave the encampment or face suspension from the university. So, of course, there will be more coverage of that on Bloomberg TV and radio throughout the day. And Joe and I will be back at 5 p.m.
We'll meet you then as we hand things to New York right now. Emily Grafeo and Tim Stenovec. Bloomberg Business Week is coming up next on Bloomberg TV and radio.
is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everyone. Live on Bloomberg TV, on radio, streaming on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. It is a Bloomberg Business Week. I'm Tim Stenevec. My co-host, Carol Masser, is off today. Here with us in her place is Bloomberg News cross-asset reporter Emily Grafeo. Emily, thanks for joining us this afternoon. We got a big show, big week coming up. Stocks up, yields down as we kick off the week. As I mentioned, a big one because we're going to hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell on Wednesday. We'll get April's payrolls report on Friday. Also, some huge companies reporting, including Apple and Amazon. We'll get to all that, but first, we want to get to Jay Powell because today's big take shows that Powell's hawkish pivot has just begun. Also, Tesla having its best day in years after Elon Musk's quick visit to China pays immediate dividends. Also, have you been to Las Vegas recently, Emily?
I have not.
Okay, well, it's
Not
definitely not yet. It's definitely having a moment right now. I feel like several of my friends here in New York have gone just to see concerts at the Sphere.
It's all about the Sphere.
It's all about the Sphere. We're actually going to check in with the youngest CEO on the Strip. The CEO of the Apollo-owned Venetian Resort is going to be joining us. Also on energy, more than a dozen U.S. nuclear reactors shut down in recent years. Why those shutdowns may actually not be permanent. All that and more over the next hour on Bloomberg Business Week. First up, though, a check of the day's trading day and business news. Welcome back, Charlie Pellet.
Hi, thank you very much. And here's what's going on. Stocks higher across the board right now. We've got gains for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. S&P right now higher by about 0.3%, up 15 points. Dow Industrials up 155 now, up 0.4%, while the NASDAQ Composite Index up 66 for NASDAQ. That is a gain right now of 0.4%. 10-year 4.61% with a 2-year that's now yielding 4.97%. Spot gold up $3.91 the ounce, 23.41 on the precious metal, up 0.2%. On a retreat today for crude, West Texas Intermediate down 1.6% right now, 82.50 for a barrel of WTI. Elon Musk's visit to China paid immediate dividends. Tesla getting in-principle approval from government officials to deploy its driver assistance system in the world's biggest auto market. Tesla shares right now up by 15%. One other development with Tesla, according to a report today from the California New Car Dealers Association, Tesla sold fewer vehicles in the state for the second straight quarter, suggesting its popularity in the state may have peaked. Again, Tesla up now by 15%. Recapping stocks higher, S&P up 14, a gain there of 0.3%. I'm Charlie Pellet, and that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Hey, thank you so much for that update, Charlie Pellet. Really do appreciate it. Well, as we mentioned, the Fed kicking off its two-day policy meeting tomorrow, and Bloomberg Economics has this really cool tool. It's called the Fed Sentiment Index. It's powered by natural language processing. It's an algorithm based on more than 60,000 Fed headlines, and it shows that back in December, Powell delivered a major pivot. Okay, we knew that from just watching the markets and seeing how investors have reacting. There's a catch, though. 4 months on, with demand powering ahead and inflation stuck above target, Powell has been forced into a reversal. The index now shows that there's more work to do to bring inflation back under control. Tom Orlick is Bloomberg Economics chief economist. He edited the story that's today's big take, also among the most read on the Bloomberg terminal. He joins us from our Washington, D.C. bureau. So, Tom, explain what exactly the Fed Speak tool is. Tell us how it works, and also how it can give us some sort of preview of what we may hear from Jay Powell come Wednesday at the press conference.
Well, great to be here, Tim. What we've done is we've taken 60,000 Bloomberg News headlines on Fed Speak, the things which Powell and his team on the FOMC say to steer the markets on where policy is going. And we've trained a natural language processing algorithm to read those headlines as hawkish, neutral, or dovish. What that means is that anytime we get a new Fed headline, our algorithm can read it, assign a score to it, and we can tell you whether the Fed is trending towards cuts, towards hikes, or towards a hold at its next meeting. Now, the index right now is telling us something pretty interesting. It's showing that in December, there was a major dovish pivot. That was well-timed. We think it saved the US economy from a looming downturn. But in economics, as in life, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And the same impulse which propped up growth is now also giving an additional impulse to inflation. Our index shows that's already prompted a mini reverse pivot by Powell. He's already moved back in a hawkish direction. We think that pivot has further to travel, perhaps as soon as this week's FOMC.
So, Tom, what did the natural language tool teach us in December that we wouldn't have been able to figure out without using the tool?
So that's a really great question, Emily. Let's go back to a lady called Ellen Mead. Ellen Mead was a senior economist at the Fed, left a few years ago to become a professor at Duke University. And she was one of the pioneers of using data science, machine learning, natural language processing to understand Fed communications. And what her early research demonstrated is that these data science tools, they can reveal insights which aren't kind of visible when we're just reading the headlines ourselves. And when it comes to December, what our index is telling us is that really this was a very significant pivot, one of the biggest monetary policy surprises of the current cycle. What our index is currently telling us, based on the latest readings from April, is that things have started moving back in a more hawkish direction, but really they've undone only a small amount of the stimulus that they unleashed with that December pivot. And that's why our US team, our chief US economist, Anna Wong, and her colleagues think that Powell has further to go in a hawkish direction.
Hey, Tom, one interesting part of the story that is included in today's big take is this idea that, well, with rates high, why are we still seeing inflation high? And different theories are put forth. And there's this theory that's gotten a little bit of attention over the last month when it comes to MMT and the idea that actually hikes from the Fed are a growth driver rather than a drag on the economy. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it's an intriguing idea, Tim. Basically, it goes something like this. Households, businesses have got so much money in savings accounts and in bonds where they're getting higher returns when interest rates go up, that's giving a boost to spending power. And so perhaps Fed hikes aren't a drag on demand and a drag on inflation. Perhaps in the current cycle, they're actually a driver, boosting spending power and actually keeping inflation lodged at a high level. So that's an intriguing idea. It's an idea which has caught the attention of the markets, including from some big investors moving a huge amount of money around. Our view is that it's a bit difficult to support with either the economic theory or the economic data. If you think about it from the theory perspective, well, actually, it's not too far from the view set out by Turkey's President Erdogan, who, of course, famously said rate hikes drive inflation, rate cuts reduce inflation. And look what happened to Turkey, right? Turkey had spiraling inflation, a collapsing currency. So it doesn't seem like the theory worked out very well there. And then if we look at the data, well, it does seem to us that interest income has actually been a drag on consumption this year, not a driver. So an intriguing theory, one that's fired the attention of the markets, not one which we give a huge amount of credibility to.
So what should we be looking out for on Wednesday? Is this going to be a Powell that has to kind of walk back some of that dovishness that he did present during this, big December pivot that your tool is showing?
So it's interesting, Emily. I mean, certainly we're not going to hear the same kind of dovish messages from Powell that we heard in December. Already in April, we heard from Powell that the data wasn't giving him confidence in disinflation, that the Fed was prepared to wait with policy settings restrictive for as long as it takes to be convinced that disinflation is on track and price gains are coming back to their 2% target. The question at Wednesday's press conference is if he goes further than that. and perhaps hints at a world where there are no rate cuts coming in 2024, or maybe in a risk scenario, also raises the possibility, not as a base case for the Fed, but as a possibility that there could be hikes coming if needed.
Our thanks to Tom Orlick, Bloomberg Economics chief economist. Check out today's Big Take. It's just a fantastic read. The natural language processing tool, the Fed Speak tool. Very cool stuff. And at Big Take or Bloomberg.com/Big Take. Hey, a redhead crossing the Bloomberg terminal. Several of Glencore's largest shareholders believe that the company should retain its coal assets. That's according to people familiar with the matter, throwing a proposed spinoff into doubt. For more, check out the Bloomberg terminal. Okay, so rates are still high. Something else that's higher today, shares of Tesla, having their best day in more than 3 years. This after Bloomberg reported that the company received in-principle approval from Chinese government officials to deploy its driver assistance system in the world's biggest auto market. Tesla did manage to clear two of the most important hurdles. It reached a mapping and navigation deal with Chinese tech giant Baidu, and it met requirements for how it handles data security and privacy issues. For more, we go to Craig Trudell, Bloomberg News Global Autos editor. He joins us from London. Craig, it's been a busy few weeks for Mr. Elon Musk. The company coming off its first year-over-year decline in quarterly revenue since 2020. The company sold fewer cars in the first quarter, and Tesla cutting at least 10% of headcount. Then over the weekend, Tesla makes this unannounced trip to China. What did he accomplish exactly that has investors so excited?
Yeah, I think the approvals that you mentioned off the top were significant and something that Tesla's been after for quite some time. Actually, it was on the agenda when Musk was last in China. And the reason he's interested in this is fairly clear. I mean, he's been able to charge $8,000 or $99 a month. And those are, prices that have come down recently. Actually, he was charging more for this previously in the U.S. But for a system that Tesla has marketed as full self-driving, and that's a misnomer, and that the system is not a self-driving system. It doesn't make Teslas autonomous, but it nevertheless is a higher level functionality. It enables Tesla to essentially, steer and stay between lines with constant supervision of a human driver whose hands are on the wheel or eyes on the road. At least that is how the system has been designed. Not everybody follows that, and unfortunately, that's led to quite a few crashes. Which, I think that's one of the things that makes this so interesting is that there's been so much effort on the part of Tesla to put emphasis on how far along the system is coming at a time when U.S. regulators actually are finding serious faults with autopilot, which is the lower level functionality of their driver assistance systems.
Craig, what part of the approval was tentative? The Bloomberg News headline, Tesla soars on tentative approval for driving system. What happens next before Tesla can actually roll this out in China?
So we know that there's, an in-principle approval for Tesla to offer this in China. What we don't know is what sort of boxes still need to be ticked for them to pull that off. And, one of the factors that is going to be sort of determining of whether or not, it can happen quickly, I think, has to do with the Baidu mapping and navigation functions, because Tesla has sort of been a staunch believer in the idea of developing this technology without using maps. It's had this view that, we humans use our eyes to navigate roads. And so we should build, these driver assistance systems, with cameras that function as eyes and develop, the brains, if you will, for cars to sort of, decide what to do. They are very much in the minority in terms of, thinking that this is the best approach, that we don't need maps in addition to, eyes and machine learning. And they've really sort of bent to China's requirements here because, if you want to offer these systems in China, you don't have a choice. You need to partner with a handful of companies, all of which happen to be Chinese, to work with them on, mapping and navigation. And Baidu is one of them, and Baidu does have a sort of existing relationship with Tesla just for, navigation apart from, being used for driving systems. If you as a customer plug in where you want to go, Baidu supports, the turn-by-turn for you.
Hey, Craig, let's take a step back and just talk about Tesla in China, because a few years ago, I mean, this company did something that no other company in the history of China was able to do. It was an American company that opened a factory not with a joint venture with a Chinese company. That's something that no other company had been able to do. Since then, a lot of other EV companies, homegrown EV companies in China, have sprung up, and Tesla is no longer the only game in town. And in fact, BYD sales there surpassed Tesla sales. There are lots of less expensive models as well. What's the status of Tesla in China right now?
They really have been struggling for the reason of just how much more affordable electric vehicles are out there. Particularly at BYD, I think they really have absolutely pulled away from the pack, and Tesla has not been able to keep up. One of the other things that BYD does, in addition to just having a much more extensive lineup, is just regularly updating the vehicles that it has in its lineup. Whereas, Tesla just has a handful of vehicles that they sell. They do, from time to time, make updates, but for the most part, what the consumer sees and the design of these vehicles haven't changed a whole lot. And, when you just have, a couple of cars to offer, and BYD has, just absolutely just a very, very extensive, set of vehicles, it's difficult to keep up. And so, I think the value for money that some of the other brands have been offering have been, difficult for Tesla to answer. And they've really cut prices to a significant degree to where some analysts are doubting that, Tesla's earnings, that there's much of anything left in terms of operatings for their business. And so that's another reason why this, incremental revenue boost or potential bit of incremental revenue from, these driver assistance systems is a big deal.
Well, check out this story and more on the Bloomberg terminal. This is a Bloomberg exclusive reported early this morning. Tesla shares, by the way, up 14.7% for their biggest single-day move going back a few years. Joining us, Craig Trudell, Bloomberg News Global Autos editor from London. Craig, thanks so much for that. Really do appreciate it. As I mentioned, Tesla shares higher by the most since going back to March 9th of 2021. Taking a broader look at the market, still seeing some green there. The S&P 500 up 0.3%. Well, coming up, we talk about the long-held view that nuclear reactor closures...